Hey, Mr. Chairman, if I could bring the County Clerks Association back up. Mr.
We're ready.
We're Ms. Langford, can I bring it back up? Talk
We're
about,
gonna do a little clarification this morning. By the way, thank you very much. We appreciate our clerks a lot. So we're not opening testimony. We're just gonna do a clarification real quick on some of this morning.
in some of the testimony, there were, I can't remember the exact phrase, but ballots laying across the table. We talked about.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry I made such a flip comment. When
Just to clarify the process.
when absentee ballots come into the clerk's office, they are checked in because we've checked them out when they leave, but they're checked in the Wild Reg system so that we know that they're back in the courthouse. And then they are secured. In some cases, it's bags like what Julie had this morning with her ballots in it, or maybe boxes, but they're secured, they're locked. They're put into a secure place, depends on what each courthouse has. I know in my experience, we had a designated election room, and we had that room was locked during election, as well as we had cameras on it and that type of thing. So we knew where the ballots were at all times. And then the ballots stay there until it's time to process them. So, and the processing is what we went through this morning. But yeah, they're not laying on somebody's desk. I'm sorry. Flip comment.
We got it. Ms. Freeze, do you have further comments?
No, I concur with what Mary has said, that every single one of us have maybe a little bit different process. Again, Homeland Security, when they did our security checks, that would have been one of the things that they did ask us, is what our security was on those.
Committee, any questions for Representative Rossmo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mary, Julie, is when we had early voting, and it was really easy, and a lot of people did it. You just walked into a polling place and you voted. And are those considered absentee ballots, or how do you deal with those things? I remember putting the ballot in the machine myself.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Roscoe. So not all counties do this. First of all, it's an option that you have. It is an absentee process, but it is in person, and they get to put the ballot through the machine. So it's just like going to the polls. So they come and they check in. We ask them the same questions we do if you're on the phone, and you get a ballot just like you would at the polls. You mark it there, you put it through the machine. So that's the process. And then those results, much like what we showed you today, we do those in Fremont County on the DS-200, and they close down every night. And we have a log of everybody who's been through there, and we do the same thing every single morning until that process is done. And then on election night, that is one of our final results that come across.
Okay, thank you. All right, committee, we were through all of our testimony. We are back on timeline to process.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we introduce 22 LSO 0102 as a committee bill.
Motion second. Second by another Scott.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I move on page 3, line 23, we delete the words "other than the county." On page 4, line 1, delete the word "clerk," start of the line.
Second. What? So the motion was to strike on page 3, line 23, "other than the county," and on page 4, "clerk," to strike that from the bill. That was at the request of the clerks. So moved and seconded, discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Bill's been amended. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we include in the bill an amendment to 22-26-112, which is misdemeanor offenses generally. That the amendment would provide that we add a new subsection to that laundry list of those offenses, that is any person violating 22-9-125 D little 4, which is this provision at the bottom of page 3. So that would make that for any person that discloses those things and violates that provision would then be subject to misdemeanor 6 months or $1,000. This is what's in that list of violations.
Motion's been made, second. Moved and seconded. Discussion on the amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, what I envision this as being is this is the key provision that we're scared might be violated in this one. And it would, I think, be useful to the county clerks in terms of being able to instruct their people that you got to be careful with that because there is a criminal penalty. And I think more importantly, it would give the people that are involved, when somebody they know or a friend of theirs, something, asks for information, they'd have a good excuse to say, I can't because there's a criminal penalty here. And I don't want to see the inside of the county jail for a year. I doubt that there would ever be a prosecution on it. There could be one, but I think mostly it's preventive medicine and would give people a good excuse to resist any kind of social pressure to let any of that information out they might happen to acquire. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the reason I made the motion.
Further discussion. I will. I'm opposed to it, and I'll tell you why. Is I think it's clearly covered under the felony part of the law, and my belief is if it's intentional on it, it ought to be a felony. If you break that seal and you pull it up, I think you're worthy of having a felony. And for my end, unless I hear different, I do think it falls under your oath that you take when you go in, and I think the clerks can tell them that. So for that reason, I'll be a no vote on the amendment.
Chairman.
I believe the way I heard it read, that was the machine, the breaking of the seal and such, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm wrong. Okay, I
Yes.
can accept that.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, if you look at the felony offenses, which is in 22-26-101, some of the things that could be done would arguably be a violation of that. Opening of a ballot box, unlawful opening of a voting machine, unlawful possession of a key. But the simple, we saw the ballots go in and we saw what was on them, which sounds like to be somewhat unavoidable. As you clean the thing up, I don't think is covered. So I think we do need this offense. And I think a misdemeanor is more appropriate given the nature of the offense, and I think would be perfectly adequate to get it done. I think a felony would rouse opposition to the bill in the either the Senate or the House.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in support of the amendment, essentially for our ability to work on it in the next meeting to understand where there might be some gaps between the 22-26-101 provision, which is the list of the felony offenses, and understand maybe whether or not we have accurately captured the concerns associated with the early opening of the absentee ballots. So I think we should add it in and evaluate this and allow LSO also to evaluate it more carefully where there might be some gaps. I think, one of the primary concerns, and I don't know that Senator Scott's amendment addresses this, is, the communication of early results, right? And so by our next meeting, I'm hopeful that we and the audience can take some time to think about our concerns about that and more thoughtfully
provide some remedies or some deterrence associated with any kind of communications about that. So I would like to support the amendment and my second as a kind of a placeholder for further discussion.
Won me over. Further discussion. Senator Scott? Mike's on.
That's fine.
Anyone else? Further discussion on the amendment? All in favor, say aye. Opposed, no.
I hope it was good.
Amendment is passed. You're going to jail if you tell somebody about the election. All right, we're back on the bill. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the motion was to sponsor the bill. If we were to pass that motion at this time, the next meeting will be during session. And I'm asking the chairman, do you want to bring this bill back up for the interim committee? Or is handling any questions on this one adequate for doing during the session?
I personally am comfortable letting LSO draft and look for those holes. We've got the general idea as long as the committee's there, and go ahead and vote on the bill to bring it up. It gets it off our plate. We don't have to go through it again. So is there any objections to that, folks?
I like it.
So what we're doing is LSO is going to try to fill the holes that are there on a misdemeanor charge. They'll draft that up, got full latitude. Are you all right with that, LSO? Josh? So we'll have you do that. We'll go ahead and pass the bill, draft it, and it'll be numbers committee bill. Absent objection, we'll call a question. Roll call.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for committee sponsorship of 22 LSO 0102, timeline to prepare and process absentee ballots as amended. Senator Boner?
No.
Senator Case?
No.
Senator Nethercott? Senator Scott? Representative Blackburn? Representative Clausen? Representative Clifford?
Excused.
Representative Duncan? Representative Air? Representative Hunt? Representative McGuire? Representative Roscoe? Co-Chairman Zwanzer?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Driscoll?
Aye.
Eleven to 2, Mr. Chairman.
Bill is passed, so that'll be a committee bill coming up. Next item on our agenda is the runoff elections and the constitutional amendment that goes with it. I think we'll have Secretary of State have someone that's able to come up and help answer questions and do it. And Josh, do you or somebody want to come up from LSO to help present, and Representative Nyman? And you can present them in either order if you want to do the constitutional amendment first or second. Presently, it's on the agenda that the constitutional amendment is ahead of it, but if you prefer to do it with the bill and then the amendment, that's fine.
How you doing, Mr. Chairman?
They always. It is not. All right, so we're having a bit of discussion here. I'm going to go ahead and, Josh, are you comfortable with presenting on a personal bill? Because at this point, it's a personal bill. We're having a discussion whether you do it. My end, I'm comfortable as chairman. You've helped me present personal bills before. So Josh, what are you comfortable with?
I would always like a backup lawyer to present my bills.
I'm going to go ahead and let you do it if you're comfortable with it, Josh. You know, I'm going to tell you from my standpoint, you folks have helped me with personal bills many a time. So. You ready, Mr. Nyman? Representative Nyman, excuse me.
It's all right. I appreciate that. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to present a good little bill, if you wouldn't mind. I was taught to say that in the legislature. Just some early precursory explanation of what's going on. I just really need to take the opportunity to be able to thank some very, very important people that worked very, very hard and helped a great deal, more than we can even possibly know, in helping formulate this, put this together, all their efforts. I especially want to thank Secretary of State Buchanan and his office, our Clerks Association, Malcolm, and all the clerks. Wonderful opportunity to be able to work with them, and LSO. Josh did an exemplary job of putting this together, working under a time crunch. And the opportunity that I had to be able to learn a lot about what we're talking about here today, and the Clerks Association and their willingness to come to the table, address concerns, bring their issues and things with the bill as it was being developed, and being able to have everybody work together to be able to put something that we could present to you. Because when I left here last time, the discussion was, we've identified a problem, but did you bring a solution? And I left that meeting with the idea that I was going to go and work diligently to find a solution. And I believe that's what we've done here. And so I would really ask and appreciate your thoughtful consideration of this legislation in regards to the runoff. It's been a collaborative effort. We've had stakeholders, boots on the ground, that have been able to have their input into this legislation. And hopefully you guys will look at this. And quite honestly, just to be completely transparent, this doesn't need to be my personal bill. I only present this because my hope from the very beginning was that you folks would take this on as a committee bill. And that was another reason for all the effort to be able to get the stakeholders involved early on, get their input, and hopefully work a lot of the issues out to help expedite this, so that you guys and gals are comfortable with what you see and can take something that's solid and build on it, or take this and look at it and see what we can do with it. Because I know for a fact that this is a very much heavily desired piece of legislation that my constituents back home, and I believe around the state, do want to see election reform, especially primary election reform. And so I believe we've made every effort in this legislation to be able to provide that for you folks. So, and I'm going to ask Josh, he put a lot of work into this, laid it out. If you have questions for me, I'm glad to field any questions that you would have. But we have a constitutional amendment that will take care of the timelines that are in statute, that would take care of any of the issues that would come during a redistricting year or a census year. And then the balance of the bill has been worked on. And so Josh, I will step aside and let him take it if that's all right with you. Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Josh Anderson, LSO. I don't know if you have a preference on which bill we look at first.
So I have a question as we go into it, probably that may affect that. Is runoff bill, as I understand it, can't stand alone through another redistricting without a constitutional amendment. Is that correct?
The constitutional, Mr. Chairman, the constitutional amendment would be required during a redistricting year. Otherwise, that there would be no need for the constitutional amendment any other year but. But the issue that we face is that we would have to revisit this. So the consensus view was from the folks that we're talking to, thought it would be prudent to be able to work this at one time and provide the opportunity not to have to go back and go through this again, because this will come up in another redistricting year. There's no point in that. And so, and because we are in a redistricting year, that would be necessary to have the constitutional amendment to be able to make it basically a complete piece of legislation that would not require going back and having to revisit it. So yes, sir.
Thank you, Representative Nyman. So you'd have no objection if we just went ahead and melded them into one bill. You can go ahead and work them somewhat together.
According to the way it's kind of written, they basically are. The one is contingent upon the other. And so, yes, that would, I mean, they're basically put together like that. And actually the Secretary of State could actually speak to that even in a further detail. But yes, that would be a logical thing to do, I believe, because we can't, if we didn't, we would have to redo this, and it would basically null and void the legislation every 10 years. And so, and that's pointless. We're not trying to figure out ways of creating more work and more anxiety for everybody. My desire in this was to try to figure out a way to make a piece of legislation that was going to be good and that it was not going to need a bunch of extra work later on. So we're trying to figure out ways not to complicate it. We're trying to make it as simple and as straightforward as possible. So yes, sir.
So without objection, we're just gonna have you work right through both of them together and then we'll amend them in this one bill.
I would have no problem with
That's
that
the
at all.
case. We'll treat it that way unless there's objection from the committee. So we'll just take off through it, start to finish, and then we'll work the bill. We'll take the comment.
Very good, sir.
Scott,
Mr. Chairman, I would hope we would work them somewhat separately. Frankly, I have problems with the constitutional amendment that are in addition to any problems with the bill.
we'll do it that way then. I've got someone a little more senior than me, so we'll take your pick, which one you want to take first, and we'll work through it, and then we'll go to the next one.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, and I would note, these would likely need to remain separate bills. I mean, they, as Representative Nyman noted, they go together and you couldn't pass one without the other. But the constitutional amendment would need to be its own bill and be on, because it would have to pass with a 2/3 vote. So, Mr. Chairman, I think we'll start then with just the general runoff election bill. That's the primary piece of legislation. And then the constitutional amendment is simply necessary to address an issue with that. So the bill itself, Mr. Chairman, while it's long, it really only does a few things. It creates, of course, the runoff election, and then it moves the date of the primary election. And then much of the rest of the bill is simply changing related dates that need to change to conform with those two changes. So while it's long, the main thrust of the bill is just this first new section providing for a runoff election. As noted in the bill, Mr. Chairman, on page 2, this is for nominations for governor, secretary of state, state treasurer, state auditor, state superintendent of public instruction, a candidate for the state legislature, and any federal office. And this requires a runoff for that nomination if no candidate receives more than 50% of the votes cast in that election on the partisan primary ballot. And the runoff election would be the top two candidates in that election. And then there's some details if there's a tie, there would cast lots to determine who would be the candidates in the runoff. Over on page 3, subsection C, it specifies the date, which is the first Tuesday after the second Monday in August would be the date of the runoff election. Mr. Chairman, then continuing on, page 4 creates a new, the format of the runoff election ballot. This mirrors some of the other primary ballots. And I think the Secretary of State provided much of this language, and if they have anything to add when they get up and testify, they can do so. But pretty straightforward, I think, Mr. Chairman. Continuing on then into the amended sections on page 7. The big change here is that the primary election is moved up to the first Monday in May. And then again, there it provides that if required, a runoff election is held on the first Tuesday after the second Monday in August. Again, Mr. Chairman, then most of the rest of the bill is really just getting into date changes. On page 9, there is a requirement that the county clerk publish in a newspaper in general circulation the time and place of the runoff election and a sample ballot. And then on page 11, Mr. Chairman, subsection F provides qualifications to vote in the runoff. Requires a person to be a registered voter in the jurisdiction where the runoff election is being held, currently registered in the same political party by which they were eligible to vote at the time of the primary election. So it would not let voters change parties in between the primary and the runoff. And then I believe that's all, most of the major changes in the bill, other than mostly date changes or including references to the runoff election. Just double check that, Mr. Chairman, but I believe that's primarily the rest of the changes.
Very good. Representative Nyman, a little further comment and we'll go into questions. Okay, committee questions for Josh or Representative Nyman on the runoff.
And I guess, Mr. Chairman, I would note then, if you go to the very end of the bill on page 36, the effective dates, you'll see there's a section 3 that makes this sections 1 and 2 of the bill effective only upon certification that the constitutional amendment has been adopted. And that's also reflected in the effective date. And if it is effective and the constitutional amendment passes, it makes that effective date July 1 of 2023.
Committee questions. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I could dive in deeper. What date does this make the filing date? The new filing date?
I don't misquote this. It was January 1st.
There. 2023, the way we read it, would be the earliest, and it's a non-election year, so you'd actually be 2024.
Mr.
question,
Chairman,
but
her
filing date.
question, I believe, on page 13 would be not more than 90 days, not later than 80 days preceding the primary election, which is moved up to May. So it would be February, I think.
February? Okay. Okay, and follow-up question, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the biggest concern I have for this bill is the military and the extension, because you have to have so many days to mail and get those out and things from military. Have we addressed that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, yeah, that was addressed all in the date changes. That was the requirement, be able to have that amount of time to advertise and to be able to get absentee ballots and everything taken care of in the military reach so that they would have the opportunity to be able to vote. The whole effort of this was to make sure that we didn't disenfranchise anybody or push anybody out, all the way to the point of even the discussion was even in the meeting there about making sure there's a write-in, even if there was a runoff, because we want to make sure that we follow our Constitution and say that, you know, you may be able to write on a ballot. And so that's even in here. So yes, that was designed so that we would not disenfranchise our military and make sure that they were kept in and able to do the voting.
Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Representative, I think that answers mostly what I was about to ask, but anyway, so we're talking from page 13, the 80 to 90 days prior to the first, so the filing deadline is that amount of time prior to the first runoff. Then you've got the first primary, then another roughly 90-day period to the August primary, and then another roughly 90-day period to the November election. Is that, or am I off?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hunt, what you've got is you've got your filing deadline, and then that will be go to your May primary. And then that would be if needed, if there was a runoff needed, if that was not made at that decision at that point, then you would have the amount of time between it and the August would be your runoff election. Whoever left out of the August runoff election would go on to the general. And so that was the reasoning behind the dates, just make sure that we have enough time to be able to contact everybody and everybody has the opportunity to be able to vote. And so there's just three. There would be your primary, if a runoff was needed because there was not a 50% plus one, and that then you would go to your runoff as necessary, and then on to the general. So just the three.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, yeah, and I understand that. That makes sense. But I guess, I mean, so we're talking, here's one date is filing deadline, date of first primary, date of second primary, if necessary, date of general election. And those are, if those are all roughly ballparkish 80 to 90 days apart, about.
That would be correct. Yes.
Okay. And is that just for the sake of continuity and balance?
From my understanding and when discussions with the clerks and with the Secretary of State, where there's requirements that require, and they can tell you this, they have so much time that they have to be able to notify, to be able to reach the absentees. They have so much time to mail their ballot back. So it's all based on allowing these folks to be able to vote. So those timelines are very set. So basically, what it allowed us to do by going into the statute and having to change the dates was to provide for that basically runoff middle election. So, and we have to set everything back accordingly, so that everybody has still got the right to be able to vote, sail in their absentee ballots, so that nobody's encumbered by it. Review in a runoff, you have to stretch out your not legislative, but your election process, because you have to allow time as needed for that ability to be able to run off against two candidates that do not get a majority of the vote. So.
No. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't even know if this exists out there, but in this particular, a traditional runoff election, is there the capability for, like, for military purposes, is there a capability of an instant runoff potential to alleviate that lag time? So that I'm also concerned about voter fatigue and turnout. So have you researched to find out if there's a solution for just military, maybe to have an instant runoff solution so that you don't have that lag time?
Senator Driscoll, Representative Duncan, if you don't mind, I'm going to let the guy that's got some really cool answers be able to maybe clear some of that up for you, if you don't mind.
We're going to phone a friend.
Call for-
Secretary of State.
He's a good friend.
Actually, Ms. Martinez is Representative Nyman's friend on this one.
Good afternoon, Jennifer Martinez with the Secretary of State's office. Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, there are states that do utilize a component of RCV, which is also kind of that instant runoff that you're talking about, strictly for UACAVA voters.
Follow up. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Secretary of State, is this an option that we could roll into this as a possibility?
So that is a possibility. I would
Identify
take,
it again.
she just addressed me as Mr. Secretary, Mr. Chairman. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I know. Secretary Buchanan, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan. Yes, you can. I would take you back to the conversation that the committee had about ranked choice voting and any components that we would incorporate in the certification process. And so that is something that is out there, but it's subject to the same discussion we just had as far as certification of equipment. And you didn't go into a lot of detail with that. and the timeline for doing that could be turned around fairly quickly. The biggest issue in my mind is, and you can correct me on the ES&S issue, but it's not likely that that equipment for the RCV portion will be certified prior to 2024. There's a possibility that it could be. So your idea could be explored and could come to fruition in 2024, but it's not likely before then because the companies aren't going to certify for the old 1.0 standard when 2.0 is on the horizon. And if we asked them to do it, it would probably be at our expense. And I wish I could tell you how much that would cost us, but I don't have any idea. But it's definitely a possibility. And this bill is, the way it's drafted, would not come into effect until 2024. So your idea, it could parallel pretty nicely on timing for us to incorporate something like that for the military. I hope that answers your question.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Secretary, do you feel like this would be helpful to be able to speed up the process for our military so that we would have assurance that we wouldn't have any lag time in a runoff situation, that we would have a surety that our military, their votes would be able to be counted in time. We wouldn't have that delay or that lag, that we would, that window would be more secure in terms of that time frame.
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, I would defer to the county clerks on that question, because I would need to know statewide how many close calls they have when it comes to military voters. And we could kind of analyze that situation and say, yes, we could benefit from spending whatever money we would have to spend to have an instant runoff perhaps for military voters. Or is the current system sufficient? Or do because certainly we don't want to leave anybody out when it comes to voting, especially our overseas folks or our military. So I really can't answer that question, because they're the ones that would know if there's an issue with their military voters on a regular basis or not.
Question for the sponsor. On the offices included, the complaints I have heard, and I have heard some, relate to the governor's race and the congressional races, U.S. Senate and U.S. House. Why did you include in this the other five elected officials and the state legislators? I can see occasionally there would be with this bill a runoff in one of those, but it would be fairly rare. And why did you include them here?
Senator Driscoll, Senator Scott, I think the real answer is uniformity. I think it's fairness. I think it's making sure that everybody's held to the same accountability, and we have that opportunity to be able to know that the folks that we are putting in these very powerful positions are voted in and gotten in there by over 50% of the folks that are voting. So it just boiled down to uniformly going through and making sure that everybody is on the same level playing field and accountable.
Questions, committee?
And Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up to Senator Scott's question, because I think it's an excellent question. You know, in the session, the Senate, an amendment was attempted to exclude the legislature altogether. And I think it was primarily because of the problems with redistricting before we started talking about the constitutional amendment. But clearly, the will of the Senate was not to exclude certain categories of political office. At least that's the way I took that. And then I would also say, and it's not the reason I'm here today, but I'm pretty sure if you do the math in 2014, I would have come under this bill for a runoff election with 4 people in that race for Secretary of State. So it happens in some of the down ticket races on a not infrequent basis.
What happened to me in my first 2 elections? Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has anybody calculated, Mr. Chairman, has anybody calculated in it what specifically what the additional cost would be to this for either to the state or to our counties?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hunt, on state side, we have a few modifications we would have to make to Wild Reg, although not to the same extent you saw the other bills, because we're still sticking with partisan primaries. But it would cost about $230,000 on the state side, plus I think, what was it? About 30 some odd thousand for additional absentee ballots. And then the information we got from the county clerks, and they can speak to this, but that it would cost about, it costs them about $1.1 million statewide for an election. So you can basically take that number and plan on spending it again if you find yourself subject to a runoff election. And I would add, because it's germane, that you'd probably find yourself spending that on a fairly regular basis. We went back and looked, and I don't know if you have that in front of you. Oh yeah, we do right here. There would have been a runoff election in 5 out of the 6 past primary elections. There were, it would have been in 2020 for US Senator, 2018 for Governor, 2016 for US Representative, 2014, the ones I mentioned, plus it says the superintendent, I didn't even know that, plus the US Senator. In 2012, no. 2010, Governor, for both the Democrats and the Republicans. And in 2020 primary, 7 legislative races would have been subject to a runoff. So it will be utilized.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, that 1.1 million per election. So if it's a runoff, it's 2.2. So that's going to be encompassing on the 2020 for the 7 different races. That's going to be for the whole, for the race. So it's going to still be the 1.1 for that runoff.
If you're talking when you, and I, Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, if I understood your question correctly, are you saying, you're asking if that would be the cost regardless of how many offices you would? Yes.
Okay.
Maybe. Senator Scott.
Both for people in front of us now and for others that might testify, what do we know about how much fall off in turnout there is between the primary election and the runoff election with this kind of time frame? And Mr. Chairman, I'm interested both when you have a major candidate like say US Senator or Governor, something on the ballot, and in the cases that were cited where it would be just a few scattered legislative elections where I think the fall off might be major, and you wouldn't have much confidence in the result of the runoff election really representing the will of the majority, because it'd be such a, it would so turn on who happened to come out and vote in a light voting. So what information do we have on the fall off and the turnout you get?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, we have no specific information to answer your question with, other than to say anecdotally, we've always had discussions that every subsequent election you have, you're going to have less of a turnout unless it's in a year that's got an up ticket race that's really exciting and controversial. Certainly for the down ticket races, your point is well taken. And I would say this, we've had those discussions in the office, but we haven't surveyed enough other states to get that statistical information for you, but I think we could easily find that out.
Representative Nyman, do we know how many states do runoff elections now?
Senator Driscoll, currently 10 other states provide for runoff elections right now.
Did you poll any of them on how it's gone and look at their voter turnouts over time?
I didn't poll them to see how their voter turnout is doing, but they're all consistently going on with it right now. There have been none that have started runoffs and then quit. They've all consistently gone on with that type of election. So, but I did not specifically look to see how many, if there is or isn't a drop off in the number of folks voting on that runoff versus the general versus the primary. But I can, like with the Secretary of State, we can certainly gather that information, and I think that can be gathered and help you make a clear decision on this.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Committee, further questions? Further questions? Okay, I think we're through with that. Don't go too far. Representative Nyman, Mr. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to kind of tell the committee why I'm here. I guess sitting at the table with this, and it was simply to assist the process during the session when I believe it was Senate File 145 was coming around, and you know, we worked closely with our county clerks, and it was pretty clear to us that you can't build an airplane while you're trying to fly it, and you don't want to build elections while you're trying to conduct one. And so I basically made a pledge to say, look, don't push this during the session. It's getting pretty complicated, and it just wasn't going to enjoy the support, and it wouldn't have been done right. And so I pledged to come to Management Council and your committee to say this is what we'd like to look at, and that's why that's one of the reasons why elections ended up as your #1 priority. And certainly a reason why Management Council approved of that. I never had the idea that this would be done in time for 2022, as Senator Case had pointed out before. Chairman Wanitzer had said earlier, I mean, we've been looking at this stuff for 20 years. So the idea isn't that it's something that you can push through easily, and we shouldn't push it through easily. But I kind of pledged to work with everybody, and the county clerks put together a great group. And I put together a group in the office, and we met, and we got this drafted, and we went over it. So the version you have in front of you is a pretty good version. There's some things I'd like you to amend already that I've seen looking over it again and again. But we wanted to deliver a product to you as the policymakers, so that you could make a decision going forward on it. And I'd like to see it go before the entire legislative body so they can make the policy decision, because you've got a good product in front of you that you don't have to worry that if the policymakers, you and the legislature as a whole, vote for this, you can be confident that is something that will work for the state of Wyoming if this is something you want to do. And I can't say enough about the clerks and the working group in my office in getting together to try to do this. And again, I wanted to do that because I basically said I would do that. It wasn't even Representative Nyman, it was other sponsors of the bill during the session. And I kind of put the whoa on it then, but I pledged to them that I would deliver a product that you could make a decision on. And that's why I'm here. And any other questions about the bill, I'd be happy to answer. It's 2024 because that's the best way it will work.
Thank you.
So thank you. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that because I was going to do the same. I want to thank you, Representative Nyman. You did exactly what we asked at the last one, or what I asked, is you came with a solution. Josh, thank you. It was accelerated. And same the Secretary of State. I've took heat both sides of this, and it is something that people want. And I wanted to make sure that it got at least to this committee with an honest look. It's not popular on either side, folks, or at least from where I sit. So I thank you, and I think it's well done. So appreciate the work. And with that, we'll move on. We'll bring the clerks up, and we'll do their testimony. Like I said, all of you stay close because it's our question people, and we'll go down the path of the clerks and on down the road. Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Langford. Are you all by yourself? Okay. This should be easy. Those are famous last words.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor to represent the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. My testimony is going to be very brief. We were involved and asked you during the session to let us get an interim study to be able to study runoff elections. And that was the ultimate decision of the legislature. And we have followed through on our promise to participate in that. We want to thank you for that. We also want to, know that you realize that this is a complex change to the election code for the state of Wyoming as well as for the county clerks. We appreciate the opportunity to review this legislation. We've reviewed the timelines that you've expressed concern about, and they're good. We have also reviewed procedures, and we're happy with the procedures that are in this bill. And we have participated in the development of this bill, and we appreciate the ability to do that Representative Nyman has given us, as well as the Secretary of State's office. And with that, we want you to know that we can administer this bill in this election if it's moved forward and becomes state law. And we thank everyone for the opportunity to participate. And I'd stand for questions if you have any.
Question for Ms. Langford. That was as easy as it looked like it should have been. Thank you. Do we have any other agency people or legislators that would like to testify? Seeing none. Members of the public. Does anyone come forward, may?
You have two online.
Okay, we'll do them last. Looks like we got three. You folks can line up. You ready? Welcome, Mr. E. Thorne again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to testify one more time before you today. The sentiments delivered about the simplicity are really all I'm here to deliver on behalf of Republicans all over Wyoming. This is the #1 issue they feel will contribute mightily towards election integrity. They truly want to see majority elections results. They truly do. And so they're not going to let this issue go. We hear about it nonstop, daily, through all of our means of feedback from every grassroots channel to the state party. And so plain and simple, I say to you, Mr. Chairman and committee, please vote for this. I'd like to get it out onto the floor. I think there's plenty of matters that we can work out. I will add this, that it's not just a focus on the issue, it's a focus on the questions we are getting through the party channels are which legislators, which public elected officials are supporting and which are opposing. And we want to know, and we're going to look at all the different methods of measuring and evaluating votes. And that's what I wanted to bring to you today. Stand for any questions.
Questions? Mr. Co-Chair.
And slightly off topic, Mr. Chairman, but about 5 years ago, the chairman of the Republican Party at that time came and said the exact same thing in regards to a presidential primary. It was the #1 issue. The grassroots want it. The membership desires it. We're watching how you all vote. We did all this work for 2 years. Democratic Party came to the table and said, we're ready for a presidential primary. And after 2 years, Republican Party just fizzled and went away. And I've never heard anything for the last 3 years about, at least from this party, and saying we still want a presidential primary. And so it's difficult for me to hear, this is our #1 issue. We're all committed to this. We want it to happen. I just want to make sure that it's going to be followed through. Because as I said earlier this morning, this committee said, we understand, we hear you. We're going to try to do something, and for 2022, I think we all agreed that might not be feasible. It's just difficult to hear this again, that we're fully behind this, and then a year from now, it might fizzle depending on the election wins. So I don't know if you have any response to that or thoughts where the party is on a presidential primary as part of this as well, because if we are moving the election cycle up, We could have a presidential primary at that same election. Is that part of the discussion? Maybe that's the right question to
Mr.
ask.
Eathorn, thoughts?
I'll do my best, Mr. Co-Chair, to answer that. We don't see a lot of discussion on presidential primary, except for I want to show up and vote. And they understood that there were technicalities involved as to why they were not able to just show up to a caucus and vote for president and go home. That was quite an educational undertaking for the county parties and the state party to get that information out to the electorate. Since then, this issue is different in a couple different ways. Presidential primary comes and goes. This is a 2-year cycle, and this has been ongoing for at least 10 years. I've been involved in the party for 12 years, and this seems to be the focus they keep returning to. And it is also different in this way. It's passed by resolution by the State Central Committee. So the majority of 23 counties, I believe 18 or 19 at the time, voted for this in resolution form. So it is specific. Happy to provide that to all of you again. It's on our website, www.wyoming.gop. Also, a number of counties, almost the same number of counties, passed that resolution individually. So it truly is a grassroots undertaking and commitment. I believe it'll remain long-term.
Questions for Mr. Eathorn? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee.
Batter up. Welcome.
Hello, welcome to Sheridan. Mr. Chairman and committee members, my first time ever doing this, so excuse the jitters. I am Carla Kloffenstein, and I am the chair of the Election Integrity Committee of the Republican Women's Legislative Action Committee here in Sheridan. And you all know us. So my forte or my interest is in election integrity. I stand before you today to speak in favor of the runoff election amendments and bill, and I'm strongly opposed to ranked choice voting and open primaries. Runoff elections offer the voters a true voice in who they have chosen for an office, as it would take a majority, over 50% obviously, to be the winner. This would add credence to this chosen person as a truly elected office holder. The major concern that I have heard is cost. And yet our state government has found millions of dollars to potentially bid on a land deal that fell flat. If the will is there to offer a truly fair election, then the money would be found to hold this election. I am strongly opposed to ranked choice elections. Yes, they have been approved in a few areas across our country, as was talked about earlier, but only used in statewide sense in Maine. Many cities have instituted this method, but the voter corruption.
Hey, to interrupt, can we just
Yes.
stick on the bill? We've already killed the other two bills.
Okay.
So
All right, very good. So in essence, well, okay, then let's address the $850,000 cost, because you've not tabled ranked choice. It's possibly a lie. That's $850,000, and you may still. Okay, $850,000. And this would be money if you're going to have, because I can tell you the room was full of people earlier that want runoff elections. And so if you're going to spend $850,000, let's spend it one time. We sure would have loved to have it done by 2023. That's not going to happen. So let's do it right. Let's get it ready for 2024, but start now. It's a process. It's not something that can be done, like we were talking about in a few months. So in essence, here in Wyoming, we have a party form of government where each party picks their candidates through a primary system. The runoff elections process would allow this to continue, since the Wyoming legislature thus far has been unwilling to pass a crossover bill to keep voters in their own lane. Also, by moving the primary dates to May, this would allow, except in the case of a runoff election, the ability for the state of Wyoming to be a valid part of the national party convention process. Currently, Wyoming is an afterthought in this process, since our primary is held after the national convention usually. This would encourage national candidates to come to Wyoming, spend some money and talk to us instead of just flying over. Please pass the runoff elections amendment and bill out of this committee for discussion in the full legislative bodies. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Question, Mr. Falkenstein. Well done for your first time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody wants a break. We're gonna do a 10-minute break. It's 2:48. We'll come back in at 3 o'clock. I'm sorry to do that to you, so we'll take a quick break.
Gail Simmons, Civics 307 from Sheridan County. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to first answer the question that Senator Scott had. On the last page of the handout that I provided was a runoff election participation decline. This actually came from fairvote.org, and they got these by going to the 10 states that have runoff elections and getting the actual participation numbers from their Secretary of State. And very specifically, the decline in turnout, average decline was 38%, and the median decline was 37%. How far the runoff is from the election also has an impact. If it is more than 20 days, which because of federal law now is required, it is 3 times the drop in turnout. So we already have a very poor turnout in primary elections. And so this actually means a greater decline. So the issue that was identified about how relevant are the results if the participation rates are that low. And again, I'm just going to reiterate the participation and competition is what drives how valid our republic is. I also wanted to point out that I actually did go and look at the resolutions from 2018, 2019, and 2020 on the GOP site. And I looked through them, I don't know how many times, and I could not see anything there on a resolution about runoff elections. There was some about election integrity, but nothing about runoff elections. Also, I just wanted to point out from a comment that was said before, primaries are only nominating elections if you as the legislature says that they're nominating. So they are not by definition nominating unless you put it in the statute that they're nominating. And again, that kind of goes back to some of the discussions on the other bills. And then the other thing I wanted to point out, just 2 more points, is when I look at the participation rates from 2018 in the gubernatorial election, the top vote getter of named candidates was Governor Gordon with 38,951. However, the largest vote getter, if you want to look at it that way, were the 63,116 registered Republicans who did not vote in the primary. Now, my takeaway from that is those 63,000 were fine with whoever won because they didn't vote. And when you add that in, what you get is that if you add that to Governor Gordon's number, that's 102,000, that's 56% of the registered Republicans in 2018. So the lack of participation, if that is seen as I'm fine with whoever wins, then they were fine with Governor Gordon and it was 56%. And the last thing is that I'm really concerned about a filing period that begins in this particular case in the 2nd week of February. What else happens in the 2nd week of February is you convene the budget session. So now you have the filing period overlapped 100% with a legislative session. This is not good. And I stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Gail, you don't think I can be a decent legislator for 6 weeks and campaign for re-election at the same time?
My personal opinion is there are some who can't, whether there's a filing period or not.
Oh.
You're excluded from that group.
Thank you.
Questions, committee? Questions? Thank you. We've got one that's in the waiting room that is got an appointment. So we have Rep. Moline from Farm Bureau, and I'm going to go ahead and jump him over a legislator so that he can testify before he leaves. Welcome, Mr. Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Okay, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I'll try to be uncharacteristically brief. Wyoming Farm Bureau supports this runoff idea. We've had this policy since 1986, so it's not a new idea. It's been in our book for over 35 years. Something that we've wanted. Now we're getting a chance to work towards it. I think there's some positive things on there. If you do have the runoff, I think you'll end up selecting probably the stronger candidates. You'll have a better chance of selecting stronger candidates. And I like the idea of the constitutional amendment for a couple of reasons. One thing, you won't have to revisit this every 10 years. It'll be done. But having it go to the people, you'll know what the people think because they'll vote on it, vote it up or vote it down. And then we'll know. With that, Mr. Chairman, sitting in firm support of this concept, I would sit for any questions.
Thank you very much. I think we have Representative Sweeney in the waiting room as well. Representative Sweeney, you need to text me. I didn't know you were there. And we can't.
No.
There we go.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Pat Sweeney, House District 58 from Casper. Sorry I can't join you today. But I oppose this legislation. I appreciate all the work that's been done on this and appreciate Representative Ninemann's work on this and Secretary of State's. Really appreciate the county clerk's efforts. I appreciate our county clerks every day in their efforts and really appreciate them. The main reason that I oppose this is, you know, the crossover voting would not, if you add those all to Governor Gordon's campaign, which that wasn't the case as far as the research I've seen, it still wouldn't have made a difference for the other two candidates to have risen to the top. And this notion that that this will be a better system, I just go and look at what happened in Georgia and the runoff election process. And I probably shouldn't have said Georgia because everybody thinks that's a bad example, but I just don't think we need this. And frankly, if I were in a runoff situation, which I probably could easily be in my House district, the additional cost of running the campaign that much further also increase my cost to run in that much more money either I've got to put in it or try to go out and raise. And that is probably 10, well, much more than 10 times with now the cost of a gubernatorial race in our top 5 electeds. And I just don't think it's even any possible way it's needed in our state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Representative Sweeney? Questions for Representative Sweeney? Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for recognizing me. I'm Chris Corfonta. Again, I did not intend to speak on this bill, but someone mentioned election fatigue. I'm already fatigued by thinking about extending the election and all the money spent to downgrade and castigate the other side, which adds to division. I understand the premise behind it. We all want someone elected to represent us that get the majority of the vote. I understand that. I worry that this is just going to open it up to more money a lot of it from out of state, undisclosed money. It's also going to take our current representatives from the people's work. They're going to be more concerned about raising money for the election, or two, we're a citizen legislature. It will prevent people from running who can't afford to get the money. And I just want to add a couple of statistics here. This is nationwide. In the last federal election, $14.4 billion was spent on federal elections. Just think what that money could have been done had it been put to good use. A study by the Sunlight Foundation found that the top 200 politically active groups, corporations in this case, get $760 in tax breaks for every $1 they spend. We want good government and for the common good, rather than deep-pocketed special interests and threats of retribution impacting our legislators who are given their time and their effort and their best shot at doing what's best for us. So if you kind of recall some of the flyers that have gone out for election campaigns, they're not policies, they're damning the other side, adding to the divisiveness that our country and our state is seeing now. So I hope there's another way to achieve the same goal without extending the election season, increasing the amount of money that's being spent in elections, opening it up to out of state, I was going to talk about this on campaign finance, but a lot of the flyers that I got in the last gubernatorial election, they were from an out-of-state dark money group, just damning the other side. We can't do this. Again, we have citizen legislators. They can't afford to run, and if they can, then why are they doing it? I don't know. I'll stop here. If there are any questions, I'll take them. Thank you.
Prenti, welcome again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to give you all a break after this for the rest of the day, but I'm Chairman Joey Corretti of the Carbon County Republican Party. And this is one issue that I have specifically been authorized by a majority of the members of my county party to speak on their behalf of, which is fitting considering we're talking about making sure we are having representative of a majority of the voices. A couple of questions were asked earlier, things that came up 5 years ago through the state Republican Party that you heard without casting aspersions on leadership at the time. I will tell you that we have a different Republican Party now that is hyper-focused on the grassroots. I don't know what people can't find on our website, but it's definitely one of our legislative priorities that was set back in September of last year to have runoffs. And again, we ratified resolutions in our last two state meetings. So I can help people or the committee find those resolutions. The beauty of this is, regardless of the decision the committee makes to change some of the provisions of this, you will know if it is the people's voice because it has to be ratified by a constitutional amendment in the general, and there's no concern about it taking effect in the 2022 election. So if that answers your question, Chairman Zwanzer, how do we know? You'll know because the people will tell you on that general election ballot. As far as concerns about moving the filing period up until February, I would again agree with the chairman. I think you're fully capable, and it's a bonus because to file for your office, you would just have to go to the Hirschler building, and since you're already in session, that would make it a little easier. But anybody else who's not currently a legislator would probably be able to make that deadline. And then as far as campaigning, I don't know if there's a better campaign an incumbent can have than a successful session where you're voting your constituents' will. So a lot of the questions I've heard today kind of fix themselves when you look at them in a logical manner. I don't think that the runoff election is the ultimate answer. I think it's the best answer for right now. And I say that because I've come before you before, and I will come before you again, pushing the notion that what we really need to do, as the equality state is repeal section 100 of Title 22-4 and get rid of a distinction between major and minor political parties and remove the state from the functional process that the parties should be engaging in themselves. Primaries will still exist. We will still have nonpartisan votes that we need to have, but things like runoffs, crossover voting, that would be floor rules for the parties themselves to consider how they would deal with, the same way the two minor parties currently do under state law. So we wouldn't actually have to add very much language, maybe a couple of definitions to get that done. And the reason why I'm such a big proponent of that is because in my mind, and the people that I represent agree, that is the proper way for the party to be able to conduct its own primaries. And also, even with this runoff bill, we face the very real potential of the nightmare situation. And that is having what we had in 2016. All four parties were major political parties. If you have runoffs across four political parties in the primary, what is that going to do to our clerks? I'm very protective of my clerk, and I know that that is the ultimate nightmare scenario, that they would have to deal with that. I don't think it would happen immediately, especially if this doesn't take effect until after 2022. We can look at other legislation, but for right now, it is the move in the right direction. And please stop me if you don't feel it's appropriate, but I want to use your pulpit here to let the people know that this is not a, we get it voted in, we win. This is a call to action. If the people ratify the constitutional amendment to make this the way we're going to do elections for the however long we do it, it will be incumbent on the parties and the electorate of the state of Wyoming to get involved with your clerks. They are going to need judges. They are going to need support. And they're not going to be able to pay full-time staff to do this all the time. So if we're going to have Wyoming the way we want it, Wyomingites have to have some skin in the game. So I compel the committee to vote in favor of this, knowing that it's a step forward into something else, to work with the parties, let the parties work with the clerks, cultivate those relationships to get the people involved, because it's going to take a lot of effort on behalf of the people you administer the government for, to really embrace the opportunity they're getting if this passes. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Question for Mr. Grant. Senator Case.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Mr. Corinthy. I'm intrigued with your idea about getting the state out of managing party elections and kind of get rid of primaries at all. Like I would suspect primaries could be something different. Would you agree on top of that to get the parties out of managing the state? So complementary, say, get the parties out of the process of filling vacancies and let them go to the county commissioners, and get the parties out of having a slot on commissions and boards. Would you, and maybe get the parties out of the legislature so that we, we don't have a minority caucus or a majority, but would your thinking extend that far?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, to a certain point, yes. The reason why my initial push is for repealing the 100 section and embracing the 300 section is because there's subsequent legislation that can't all be thrown into one. We kind of have that rule, it has to be one item, one bill. But yeah, I would definitely be, at least in the beginning stages, all county elected positions below the county commission and sheriff, I think should be under this posture, nonpartisan. And because those are nonpartisan jobs, your county coroner is not going to refuse to pick up a body because of their party affiliation. I would hate to see the prosecution intensity of a county assessor that assessed one person's property differently than another based on party affiliation. So I think we could, in non-policy and nonpartisan focused jobs that are elected, probably make a move to that, as far as taking the party out of the legislature. That's really up to the individual legislators right now, how much you and your affiliation and your dedication to the principles of your brand you allow to be reflected in your actions as a representative of the people while a member of that party. That's really not, I think, a choice that we would make legislatively. Trying to think of some of the other points you made. But I think there's some middle ground there, but ultimately political parties exist to affect political action, which is mostly legislative. So in the general, if you want to take the R's and the D's off the ballot, I guess that'd be another piece of legislation we have to look at, but I'm looking for definable conservative representation in my life. And that's the first place I look. And then I deal with the individual based on our principles. So I don't think all the way up through the legislature, removing political parties from the political system is realistic.
The follow-up would be, is there a government role ensuring that party affairs are handled fairly? And that a small group within a party doesn't seize control of the party by being able to make appointments and run the elections for that party to cause mischief, which has actually been alleged by the Republican Party in the state of Wyoming. So is there a role in government? Would there be a cause of action for party members to sue each other over the conduct of elections, or whether a person is an authorized elector or not? Is there a role in government to describe who can fill a precinct person? If we go with the original premise, I'd suspect not to all of those things, but it ought to be good for the goose and the gander. So I'm interested in your point of view.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, yes, if an election is won by a partisan, an individual that identifies with a partisan, I think the group that partisan or that party affiliation is with should be involved in at least the initial steps, the way we have it now, getting it to the county commissioners. As far as any of the other points you made, and does it warrant lawsuits? I don't think the point's valid, because Article 3 only lays out 7 rules, and you have half the parties in the state doing it without that being a concern of yours anyway. Why would it be any more of a concern now that we're talking about what we currently define as major political parties? There's the way statute says it's done for some, statute says it's done for others, and we're not asking to make up a new thing. We're saying, you're right, if it's good for them, it's good for us, and we should be able to operate under those same limited rules without any brand new concerns from the legislature, based on the fact that since 1984, when Article 3 was set up the way it is now, nobody's had questions up to this point.
Welcome back.
Is that better? Mr. Chairman and committee, again, my name is Patricia Junick. I am from Campbell County. I believe last time I just claimed Gillette, but it is all of Campbell County. And I am speaking again. I wasn't going to, but then I realized that I am a representative of a couple of thousand people throughout the state. And in all of our discussions, whether it's within the Gillette groups that I belong to or the statewide groups, it is an overwhelming support of this runoff bill. So I encourage you to support that, look at it, pass it. And I wanted to also address the comment about spending more money. And you well know, every one of you has spent a lot of money in your elections campaigns, I'm sure. So the positive side of that is it contributes to our economy. So that's a good thing, right? The other side of that is I think that probably more important than signs, flyers, whatever, is person-to-person contact. And having an extended length of time between the primary and the general allows you to get out and meet your constituents, go door to door. Obviously, your areas are a lot larger than the local city council or even commissioners, et cetera. And so I do encourage you again to pass this bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I know Ms. Junick likes questions, but here's my concern. So it's Wyoming. I think we're all familiar that 70 to 71% of registered voters are Republican. And for, I would say arguably anecdotally, 80% of the races in Wyoming are decided in the primary election. I mean, because there were, no Democrats in the ballot. A lot of the legislative seats, especially, I think only 15 of the 90 are under 75% Republican threshold. So if we go with, what you were saying about meeting people, and we're moving the primary up till May 1st, that means I'm out campaigning in March and April in Wyoming, trying to do door to door for the primary, which is arguably much more important in my district and many districts than the general. So do you want me showing up on your doorstep in the middle of a blizzard in March? And do you think that's the difficulty I see in this bill, is that kind of personal door-to-door campaign aspect in March and April in Wyoming. And I can get yard signs in frozen dirt. So thoughts on that?
That's a very good point, but I think you need to earn your office. Wouldn't that do that? Exactly. I have a fireplace.
Further questions? Further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Did not recognize you earlier. Former Senator Burns from here in town. Welcome. My first TRW chair.
My name is Bruce Burns, and I'm from Sheridan, and I've been Republican for 42 years now. I've served with most of you, and for those lucky few I haven't, bless you. You're all Republicans, I believe, except for Representative Roscoe, who is kind of the miracle whip among the mayonnaise family. On the bill for just a moment, whatever you want to do with it, the concern that occurred to me is the idea of registering in March and campaigning in March or April. That's right about when the general session gets out, and pretty close to when the budget session gets out. And frankly, I don't know if you're going to have a lot of retention of that many legislators. It'd be interesting to see what the turnover is going to be, because at the end of the session, almost universally, we've been down in Cheyenne. Other than those who live in Cheyenne, we've been away from our families. We've been living out of motels or rentals. We're sleep deprived. And frankly, we're just sick of it. And that's one of the beauties of being a citizen legislature. You are not a full-time politician. You have another job, you have another life in your hometown. So I'm a little skeptical about the idea of re-registering to run again within a week or so after the session's over. I think you would have fewer signing, re-upping, and we're talking about good and bad legislators. I think frankly, from among the legislators I've served with over the years, I think we'd be depriving the state of Wyoming, because I've served with a lot of really good ones, a few not so good, but almost all of you very good legislators and an asset to the state of Wyoming. And the idea of putting the date in right after the session's out, I think you would have fewer legislators re-signing. That being said, I've been a Republican for 42 years. I've been a precinct committee man. I've been a state committee man. In both, I served 8 years in the House and 16 years in the Senate, and I was caucus chair in both. So I've also served on the Central Committee and the Executive Committee of the State Republican Party. As a Republican, I would suggest you vote your conscience on this bill, which almost all of you do on just about every bill. And that's also the beauty of the citizen legislature. I get concerned when I see a chairman of the Republican Party sit up here and tell you that they're going to take names to see who's for it and who's against it, just because they're for it. And maybe the entire Republican Party in Wyoming's for it. But any legislator who is craven enough to change their vote because of intimidation tactics doesn't deserve to be reelected. And frankly, I'm very concerned when the leadership of the Republican Party threatens legislators. And I don't like it.
Questions? Senator Burns. Representative Roscoe?
The non-Republican, thank you.
That's why I feel, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Burns, that's why I feel safe to speak. And I have heard today overwhelmingly that, appearingly, all Republicans are for this. And in my district, which are half Republicans or more, I have not gotten that sense at all. And so I'm concerned as to where this overwhelming support comes from, but it's in the fact that it's, from what my experience is, it's not overwhelmingly within the Republican Party. Is that a question? That is a question. Thank you for thinking for yourself too, Mr. Burns.
It's what's
Don't
always
you
gotten
agree?
me in trouble. I believe the gentleman who spoke earlier, the chairman of the Carbon County Republican Party, I think he put it best, that the fact that it would be a constitutional amendment on the ballot is the ultimate ballot. That will tell you what the people of Wyoming think. And frankly, I've almost always voted for constitutional amendments, because that's where you get the true pulse of the people of Wyoming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's the least I could do, and you could always count on me to do the least I could do, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Corey Steinmetz, Goshen County. I guess I just want to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Mr. Moline said. This has been an issue the Republicans have talked about for years, 20, 30 years. I don't think it's a new issue. I'm also hearing concerns about timing of dates. I think those are things we can work out. The bottom line is, for a government of the people, by the people, for the people, we should be working for what the people are telling us they want to see. So I guess I would just encourage this committee that let's find a way to move this forward. If we need to adjust dates or do things like that, I think it's worth it. Thank you.
Questions from Mr. Steinmetz? Thank you. Yeah. Further testimony? We
Mr.
usually
Chairman.
don't do this. I will let you come back and do it. Usually once you've testified, you're done, but I'm going to go ahead and let you.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I heard that when I was out on a phone call, there might be some clarification needed. I am the messenger, and I was relating a message about what folks are asking the party about voting about issues. That's my statement. Is there any questions based on that?
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So maybe it's a philosophical difference, but as was mentioned, we are the elected Republicans of the state for each one of our districts, right? And so it's interesting because we each speak for our constituency, assuming the majority of Republicans in each of our districts elected us to know what the majority of Republicans, and at least the districts up here, and some of us share constituents, believe. So I guess my question is, and I keep hearing it's the grassroots, we represent the grassroots to us, but why doesn't the state Republican Party have the philosophy that we work with the legislature and listen to the people you elect and what the legislature is telling us, the Republican, overwhelmingly most Republican legislature in the country continues to put forward, and you as the party continue to spread that out, cascade it the other way. So we had this back and forth because I keep hearing from the party that this is what the grassroots wants and this is what we're hearing and we're bringing to you. Obviously, we all have constituents, right? We're talking to our own people as well. I don't see that it's a two-way street that the Republican Party has come to legislature and saying, what are you guys doing? How can we best help you cascade what you believe is right for Wyoming, being elected by Republicans? Everybody up here today, besides Representative Roscoe, is And it doesn't seem to work the other way. And maybe that's more philosophical than you want to answer, but it does seem to be increasing from everything I heard today is we represent all these people, but there seems to be no acknowledgement that we represent all these same people as well. Any thoughts on that?
I have several thoughts, Mr. Co-Chairman. I'll try to keep them brief. I have pondered many of the same questions that you're posing, and I'm not sure I can rectify them in every case, but I will state that our boss, according to the bylaws, as a private corporation, is the convention. And roughly 500 convention delegates are elected from every corner of the state. And they come and they speak and they vote and they debate, and the process is well established how to arrive at the policy that governs us for the next 2 years until the next state convention. And so that's basically our guidebook. In the meantime, the State Central Committee, which has 3 representatives from each county times 23, then are in charge to conduct that policy and speak on behalf of the convention delegates. So that's our structure, that's our hierarchy, and that's our authority. And so as far as those voices that and those votes that are electing in those specific districts, I really can't rectify all of that. But we have all of our feedback documented in every form. We keep it. Even though we're a private corporation, a private organization, a nonprofit registered with the Secretary of State, I would consider that information public. It comes from the public. And so, for example, when I am invited to the Republican caucus meeting, that is my opportunity to specifically relate convention from county convention, state convention, and accumulate all the feedback that we get throughout that time frame and deliver it to the legislature. That seems to be our best opportunity to do that. So that's why I'm pointed in specific and try to be on message during that time. Thank you.
Senator Scott. That's correct. The bill has a provision in it. So if we pass the bill, doesn't mean the bill actually passes. It's contingent on a constitutional amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I would like, given the discussion today, to preface my remarks saying I am a lifelong Republican. My earliest political memory is passing out Eisenhower literature in the 1952 election, which I guess makes me an old geezer now. Mr. Chairman, when you look at it historically, the runoff election in this country has been used in a number of states where the problem was there was one dominant party, and you had that party making the final decisions. It typically was done for the runoff just several weeks after the election. And that it had its pros and cons. You do have a fall off in the turnouts, and you do have the expense of the election, but it did work. Mr. Chairman, what's happened recently, and I don't know how recently, but it's quite recently, the federal government, from the best of motives, has put some requirements in so that we can get the absentee votes, particularly from military people who are stationed overseas. And it's hard to argue with that motivation. But the practical effect has been to push the start of the election process way back. And I think, Mr. Chairman, and I am speaking against the bill at this point, that the effect of that is to make the runoff system, until we can find a way to deal with the military much more rapidly, and maybe electronically someday we will. The practical effect is to make this just infeasible. You've heard about the problems of the expense, what it does, both expense running the elections and running in the election. You've heard about the fall off in the turnout, and that is obviously much greater with the time problems here. And then I want to concentrate on a problem that has not been mentioned, Mr. Chairman, with the filing period starting either before or at the beginning part of the budget session of the legislature and closing well before the end of the budget session of the legislature. If some citizens, Mr. Chairman, are angry, opposed to what the legislature did in the state budget, which is entirely possible. It's one of the major things we do. You put the filing period before the budget session. They don't have the remedy of running for the legislature, because that remedy has been closed before the event that got them mad happened. And Mr. Chairman, I think that would be a disastrous mistake to make. So for all those reasons, Mr. Chairman, I would urge us to defeat both this bill and the constitutional amendment, which has some other problems.
Man's committee.
Mr. Chairman.
There another cut.
Yeah, just real briefly. So, I was intrigued by this concept and thought, goodness, why don't more states have this, whether they're Democratic or Republican? And so, looking, we heard some testimony from the bringer of the bill that there are 10 states that have a runoff election. And certainly I would encourage everyone here and members of the committee to find that data. It's on the NCSL website, which is a bipartisan think tank that provides information primarily to legislators for good information. And so when I analyze these 10 states that are listed here, which again, 10 is not a very compelling number and is a bit surprising in light of kind of how compelling the argument is for this mandate, right? I mean, how could this mandate of a majority of the American people ever be wrong? Yet why are there only 10 states that have this concept in place? I can't answer that for you. But when I look at actually how many states have something similar to what we're proposing, there's only 4, right? And that's Arkansas, which we know is has a wonderful history of electing the right folks, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Texas. And there are 4 states that are doing something similar to us. I think what we hear, and maybe the bringer of the bill and the idea, South Dakota does have a runoff election. And I know it's up from that neck of the woods. But interestingly, it's limited to their congressional seats and their governor. And it's a 35% threshold, which probably explains their current governor, right? Which I think did not meet the 50%, at least in a couple of those elections. So kind of really interesting to break down and to understand. And so as we continue to have these conversations, and if this bill passes and as further education comes out there, I am curious to know why, we would only be situated with potentially 5 other states in understanding the logistical ramifications with this concept, which seems pretty compelling. So just food for thought for the committee to continue to consider. But again, let's put it to the people.
Senator Case.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. It's funny to me that we had a open primary, and then we had ranked choice voting. And then in my mind, we picked the worst bill of the 3 to land back on, and a bill that we actually tabled last time. So, but that's the way this goes sometimes. Things get resurrected from the dead. My colleague from Natrona County, my colleague from Laramie County, they make excellent points. in terms of the process that we have today, we have a bill that's unworkable and in fact isn't implementable unless we pass a constitutional amendment, and the constitutional amendment is passed by the voters. So why is it we have wasted so much time today on this bill when we didn't talk about the constitutional amendment first, which is the contingency for the bill? The process has got me a little flustered. So that's just my thought. It might be better to table this and then discuss the amendment. And if the amendment doesn't go through till, it'd be on the ballot, then we could craft legislation to do it. If we were real careful about how we wrote the constitutional amendment, really ask them a generic question rather than settling the mechanics first and then going to them for permission. My thoughts, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Further comment? I'll make a couple and some thoughts. We did bring up the constitutional amendment. I tried to amend it in and it came this direction. And so I think it does come. My thought is, and second, I'll ask for a point of correction. I don't believe we tabled the bill at the prior meeting. What we did was no one brought a motion up to bring it. Technically, that was why I brought this bill the way it was. I do not believe we tabled the bill. We failed to ask for a bill draft, and that's why I worked and talked with Representative Nyman and the Secretary of State, since we did not, and it was one of our topics. So consequently, you have a bill here. I will tell you from my end, I echo Senator Burns' comment. It's pretty hard to say no when the public can vote on a constitutional amendment. From my end, you're going to find me be a yes vote. I think this committee should bring it forward. We talked earlier on the bills about having a tool to bring things forward. This is the horse we have at this point, and I think it's clear that there is a want out there for something to happen, and you've got to have a tool to work with, and this is the one we have. Like I said, I've been torn on both sides of this, folks. I'm chairman. I've got both sides at me, but it's pretty hard to argue with the people. If it's a poorly crafted bill or it's a bad idea, our voters will fix that. If it's a great idea, they'll embrace it, and there'll probably be some ideas that come with it. So I would encourage you to pass the bill forward. It's worthy of debate. And I think it's unarguable that there's a large number of people in the state of Wyoming that want either this or something similar to it. So I'll be a yes vote. Further, Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to belabor it, but I would say to what you just said, so ditto. And I would respectfully disagree with Senator Case. I think that first off, there is no better way to pass anything than to put it before a vote of the people. I think there's no more American way to pass any policy. But I mean, looking at the timeline of this, is if everybody is in agreement that we're not really going to implement this until 2024, then okay, fine. We put this constitutional ballot, constitutional question before the people. They vote on it. If they vote on it, then if it is believed by either the Secretary of State or the legislature or both, or whoever that might be, that there needs to be some tweaking here and there, we've got the 2023 session to deal with that. And so, I mean, I guess my point being is that I think that there is, with 2024 in mind, that's 3 years away. Well, almost, I guess, by the timeline of the filing and so forth, but 2.5. But anyway, I think that, we've had 3 different options put before us today. One of them we've killed. One of them is on very, very, very feeble life support. And now we have this. And so I would commend the bringer of the bill and the good Secretary of State and his office for all the work that they put into this. And yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd say this certainly has my support. Thank you.
Danielle? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need a clarification. If this were to pass committee and say it were to pass this next session. It would have to pass this next session so that it could start the process in order to be implemented in 2024. It couldn't, so that it could be on this next election for the constitutional amendment, correct?
That's correct. So this
Right.
bill actually has a provision in it.
Right.
The bill's
It
not
couldn't
effective
wait.
unless the constitutional. So it's contingent on it passing and the constitutional amendment passing this session. Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, just think of it. We could approve this bill, but then we could fail the constitutional amendment, or the legislature could approve the bill and fail the constitutional amendment. And so the deal about having to start implementing it next year doesn't make any sense to me, because we can't start implementing unless we know what the people think on the constitutional amendment.
That's an easy fix in the bill. I mean, that's not a reason to kill it, in my opinion. Senator Boner.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just point out that section 3 that, this bill is not going to law unless that constitutional amendment is passed, and it very well could die in the legislature, not even get to the people. That's a possibility. So I think we're good there on the technical aspects, but speaking more in generally of support of the bill, I think it's important to take into account the specific circumstances in this state. We're making policy for Wyoming. That's going to be best for Wyoming. And the fact is, over the past 20 years, we've seen a significant shift towards one particular party. I think that's as a result of probably national dynamics. I suppose everybody has their own opinion, but the fact is that primary is exceptionally important. And I don't see anything wrong with having the person who moves forward from that primary, make sure that that person has the most support of the people voting in that primary. So for that reason, I think it's very important that we move this bill forward. I think all the technical aspects have been taken care of from my perspective. I thank the Secretary of State and Representative Nyman for working diligently on the technical aspects. As a farmer, I guess I'm not too thrilled about the idea of having a primary election in May, but it's not gonna be a reason for me to vote against it either. So I'm in favor of the bill.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just the one aspect I don't think we talked about a lot, and especially in politics and campaigning, there's no better thing than what we call earned media in the campaign world, which is where the news covers you and you get in your hometown press without having to spend any money. And it does worry me that if, we filed for office before the session, right, we're going to be there for 5 or 6 weeks, and we've actually extended the budget session to 25 days under the current rules. We're going to be there till mid-March, and you're going to be away from door-to-door campaigning. But I do worry about, I'm not sure what you want to call it, grandstanding, campaigning during session. Everybody will know you're running for re-election, and it's both, I'm not sure if it's more fair to the candidate who's an incumbent who gets, the hometown press of here's what I'm doing. And by the way, let me be on the local radio show every morning and giving you a further update on the legislature and getting all of that earned media that I don't think that candidate is necessarily entitled to in a fair race, but maybe that's balanced by not being able to go door to door, being back in their home district. I just think it fundamentally alters how the budget session will operate if we all know during the budget session who's running for re-election and who is not. And it might be a positive, but that's a lot more for me to think through before I'm ready to vote for this bill. And it does worry me, and I know we could fix it if the constitutional amendment passes, that it's not this exact language that were to happen. But I just think there's a lot of unanswered questions before we take up this bill and say we're going with it. Not that we don't have one more meeting and we couldn't put it on a redistricting meeting, but it's a pretty big sea change for the entire legislative process and every legislator to have a different campaign cycle and missing the first 6 weeks of 90 days, being stuck down here if you don't live in your home district. I just think it causes advantages and disadvantages that we haven't truly thought through yet.
Representative Duncan.
Mr. Chairman, and it also affects the entire House, whereas it only affects a portion of the Senate. So there's that aspect too. Not that, it is what it is, but it does affect the entire House that has to run every 2 years versus so,
And there's a few issues that I have with it. And I did poll my local. And there's 1/3 that is clueless, has no idea what's going on. Haven't heard about it, don't know. There's 1/3 that are all in, yes, you will vote for this. And then there's 1/3 that says there's nothing wrong. Don't do anything. So I'm probably a yes, just so that we can have a further discussion and really let the rest of if it does make it to the floor, to let the rest of the body to actually have a fuller discussion in it, because it's really just too many variables. So.
Call.
Can I just have a confirmation on what the vote is? This is to make this a committee bill for discussion at our next meeting, or it's to make a private bill, a committee bill for the 2022 session? Because that is historically not the process.
No, that's not the problem.
So it would be a committee bill for discussion at our next meeting.
Right.
Committee bill, it's numbered and ready to go, I believe. Am I wrong?
We cannot vote it out of here as a committee bill like this, because that isn't the first time.
Was it properly noticed in the sense of being?
It was. Yeah, and I will tell you, it's gone both ways. I've been in chair at DRW, and we've had individual bills brought off the floor and done it, but I'm happy to bring it to the next meeting.
The chair definitely would agree.
We've got the meeting of the chairs. This will be a vote to bring it to the next meeting. I'm happy to do it that way. I'll rule from the chair that we'll bring it that way. I'm not going to chin three.
As a
I
committee.
think that would be a voice vote. I mean, I don't think you can force a roll call unless it's a final vote. That's the Constitution.
Everybody's got to vote. Okay. We can move it to the next meeting. Everybody's got to vote. Okay. We can move it to the next meeting.
Constitutional amendment bill. Representative Nyman, you want to come forward and do that? It can probably be fairly quick at this point. Thank you, LSO 92. Constitutional amendment bill. Representative Nyman, you want to come forward and do that? It can probably be fairly quick at this point.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring you House Joint Resolution. This will be the Runoff Elections Constitutional Amendment. Resolution to amend the time and the process for the legislature to reapportion its membership of members in order to accommodate holding primary elections in May and subsequent runoff elections as numbered. This will be the Runoff Elections Constitutional 3 is proposed for submission to the electors of the state of Wyoming. Elections in May and subsequent runoff elections as necessary. So as you go down through the bill, you read on down section 1, the following constitutional amendment to allow for the date changes that are required that are already in statute that would be needed to provide for a runoff election. Next general election for approval of the rejection to become ballot as part of the Constitution if ratified by the majority of the electors in the election. This is the constitutional amendment to allow for the date changes that are required that are already in statute that would be needed to provide for a runoff election. That is the reason behind this constitutional amendment.
Mr. Chairman, hold on. I'm finding out, I'm getting a message that the mics are down.
Oh, that's okay. This one works.
Mr. Chairman. The microphone was off for quite some time there, so that may be the root cause, I'm not sure. It's the online. Is anybody listening online? Can you respond? They can't hear it online. It's the online people that can't hear us. I don't know why. Is anybody listening online? Can you respond to us?
Senator Case, this is Pat Sweeney. I don't know if you can hear me, but it's very scratchy and you really can't hear much.
That's definitely online. Anybody else out there? Okay, well, that's definitely online. You know, just anybody else out there? So the internet could. You know, just Katie. So the internet kicked me off on my, like the Wi-Fi, so it might be kind of just unstable. We're going to go ahead and just go back in. You were Representative Nyman with last piece. We're going to go ahead.
Very good. Thank you, Chairman. Go down to Article 3, Section 48, State Census and Special Session. The change has been not later than December the 10th. The whole point of this is that we're changing these dates to allow for the runoff. The year of that legislature receives population data following the federal census. The legislature shall reapportion its membership based upon that census, notwithstanding any other provision of this article. We blocked out the section there and then replaced it with the presiding officers of each house shall, if necessary, jointly call a special session of no longer than 10 working days for the sole purpose of reapportioning its membership as required under this section. Section 2 goes on to state that the Secretary of State shall endorse the following statement on the proposed amendment. The option of the amendment would change the date that the legislature is required to reapportion its membership based upon the federal census and would require the legislature to convene a special session if necessary to reapportion its membership. The change in timing under this amendment would allow primary elections to be moved to May to accommodate subsequent runoff elections as necessary. And that is the entire bill, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We're still without audio online. Questions for Representative Nyman? Questions for Representative Nyman? Okay, thank you. What? Oh, excuse me. Under Case.
What do we think about the idea of, you've never been through a reapportionment, so being able to achieve that in a 10-day special session, I wonder if that's possible. And I'm also worried about the cutting of the time. for the amount of time that the committee has to work to come up with a bill. Does it have to be a bill before the special session? So are there challenges there and how do we overcome them?
Senator Scott, do you have something that fits in with that?
Chairman, yeah, answering the question on the, can we do it in a 10-day session? We've done it once in a 5-day session. What happened, Mr. Chairman, in 1992, we had done a reapportionment at a lengthened budget session. The governor vetoed it 5 days before a court deadline. And we had to start from scratch all over again. We had a backup bill and a plan, and we got it all the way through the legislature in 5 days. So I think the answer to that question is yes, we could in a 10-day special session with proper preparation ahead, if that was necessary.
Follow up, Senator Case?
What about the committee time? That cuts down the committee's ability to bring a bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I think Senator Case just put his finger on one of the problems here. The census data has been getting to us progressively slower. In 1981, we did a reapportionment based ultimately on the final census numbers in the general session. In more recent years, we have been unable to do that because the feds cannot get us the data quick enough. And it has been getting progressively worse. COVID this year caused an extra special delay, but I think it we'll gradually see the time lengthen out because of both some of the technology issues involved and because of the potential for litigation over how the census is taken. And I think there is a very real risk with this bill, Mr. Chairman, that by the time of the December proposed session, that we will not have had the federal data in time to work up a decent reapportionment. I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman, we could do it this year if we'd seen really major population shifts. I think a few thousand more people or less people in certain of the areas of the state, and we'd have a problem that we'd have great difficulty meeting the deadline this time. I think we will, because the numbers happen to turn out reasonably close to our current apportionment this time. But I think that's a major risk with this constitutional amendment, that we simply will not be ready much before the traditional time of the budget session. And Mr. Chairman, while I have the floor, I see two other minor problems here. One, it's another small step by having an extra required session toward making it a full-time professional legislature, a small step, but it's down a road I don't want to go down. And Mr. Chairman, the final point is the language of the sole purpose. And Mr. Chairman, I don't know why that's necessary, but I'm afraid that would cause trouble because you'd have half the legislature sitting idle for part of the time, and the devil does make work for idle hands.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case, we are back online, so be careful what you say to the public.
Well, these are public, my friends, too. So I want to get this back to Representative Nyman about kind of this. I'm thinking that we're putting in the Constitution that the legislature is going to meet at a certain time when certain circumstances happen. And so it seems very restrictive to me. I'm not opposed to the concept because I think we have to handle the redistricting years. But is there any way that we can think about safety valves and say, for example, the legislature shall meet unless the leadership and the governor agree that another time is better. Because you don't know if the census data will be delayed. You don't know what the situation might be in terms of plagues or pandemics. You don't know, but you have a constitution that says you have to do this at this time. And then supposing the circumstances prevent it. I don't know what those circumstances would be, but you could envision something not being quite right. So what's the safety valve? How do we fix it? Right now, the only way that you could fix it is whoever's has those circumstances at the time would have to seek clarification from the court. Who has the standing? Is that the executive branch? Does the legislature have to ask for clarification? I'm just trying to avoid a wreck. Let's make this workable. So how do we think this through?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senator Case. I'm going to phone a friend because, as you said early, this is new to me. And this is something that we're trying to work through, and I'm trying to understand and trying to learn as much as I can, sir. So if you wouldn't mind, Secretary of State Buchanan, if you would be available to maybe help me come up through and work through some of the nuances of this. Help us understand what we can do to maybe avoid a collision here.
Ready for me?
Mr. Chairman, Secretary of State Buchanan. And Senator Case, thank you. I was just speaking to LSO about this, and of course, I'm open to any language you have as well as the safety valve, because I understand those concerns. When we came up with the December 10th date, I believe that was a conversation with my elections director and the county clerks as far as the last kind of possible time we could get that done and be able to do their jobs and for a runoff election or for a primary election in May. So I'm open to any safety valves. The sole purpose, it says, I think that the reason that was in there, Senator Scott says there might be some downtime and, the devil with idle hands and those types of things. But I saw sole purpose as being somewhat restrictive in nature. And of course, as you know, we've called special sessions for singular purposes a small number of times, but we have done that in the past 10 to 15 years. So I would have to think about working up an amendment to give you a safety valve in this, because I'd have to think it through a little bit, because it is a serious change.
Mr. Chairman, on this issue, the safety valve we used before, we had a requirement in after the 1990 census that we do the reapportionment at the next, basically the next general session. And they didn't give us the numbers in time. And Mr. Chairman, we just ignored the constitutional question on the basis of what's the Constitution among friends, and the basis of really practicality. We couldn't do it because we didn't have the numbers in time. So it was done at the 92 session, and then we amended the Constitution. The problem with a safety valve that gets you out of that kind of timing problem is you need this timing to make that lengthy runoff system work. And I've been sitting here playing. I can't see a good answer to that as to how you would manage that, where you simply could not do the reapportionment as early as you would like to, and you have a filing period that starts before your budget session. It just doesn't work together.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, Senator Scott, point's well taken. If we added language after the not later than December 10th, that said something along the lines, and the danger to what I'm going to suggest, I suppose, is that you may not have an end date. You may miss the deadline, or it may be too late to complete reapportionment prior to the primary, or in time to have everything that you need to have in place for the primary. But as Senator Case alluded to, what if you added language that just said, or as soon thereafter as practical, the legislature shall, if necessary, jointly call a special session, et cetera, et cetera. I don't have a lot of heartburn with the language on lines 12 through 15. I do see the issue with the hard and fast date of December 10th. And so I would suggest, if there's no better suggestion, that we add in the valve of or as soon thereafter as practical, or words to that effect, to give you the flexibility.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Nyman.
Senator Case, I appreciate that. And that's the part of the nuance of this. And that was what was so good about working with our clerks and our Secretary of State to be able to look and work through these points. And so, and yes, we live in Wyoming. Stuff happens. And so, yeah, we want to be able to make this thing work and not overcomplicate it. Thank you, sir.
Further questions? Answers? Okay, thank you. Do we have any further testimony on this? Agencies or legislators first? Seeing none. Do we have anybody in the waiting room on it before we go down again? Nobody there? Anybody from the public like to testify on it? Public testimony is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Bill's been moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
And seconded. Discussion.
I have a couple of comments.
Senator Nethercott.
It is curious to me, and this isn't an invitation, but that perhaps just citizens who aren't part of the party aren't here to testify and provide public comment, as we hear from just regular citizens all the time who aren't necessarily active in politics. And quite candidly, their comments and their feedback are the most powerful. And so it is telling to me that they're not here. The party is here, right? So that's important for me to hear and to understand and just evaluate. I also just want to express my frustration that it was presented that the bill was ready for prime time, both of them together, and they're not. And they're not. And so the committee will have to work them. And I'm so glad we didn't sponsor that and not to see it again until the budget session. And instead we have agreed to bring it back to our next meeting. So we'll continue to work it together because it's going to need a lot of work. So for that, I am pretty frustrated. And those are my comments. That additional work is going to be required by this committee to fix it. We're going to have to fix the work that was presented as being like primo. So we'll get on it.
I appreciate your comments, particularly being you're the one that does most of the work on this stuff. So I thank you. Representative Nyman, you want to come up real quick?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your comments, Senator, and thank you. I appreciate that. When I came up and said that this bill, we brought something to you that would be a product that you could take and go on with, I based that decision on work with our Clerks Association, work with our Secretary of State, and work with the LSO in an effort to try to go and bring the players, the boots on the ground, to the table, sat down, asked for their concerns, had them go through the bill piece by piece, correct the things that they saw that were problems. And that was the effort that was made. And that's what I wanted to do. And I'm sure that there is nothing perfect. I've never seen a perfect piece of legislation. In fact, I've seen a lot of discussion in my tenure of a committee bills that actually got to the floor and were discussed at great length and corrected once they got to the floor. So it would be, I would have to apologize because I didn't bring something perfect. But I did bring something to this committee that I think had all of the stakeholders that are going to be the folks that are going to have to implement this legislation, had their approval and their support, which was demonstrated here at this meeting today. If it was not perfect, you can blame it on me. That's my fault.
When you see a perfect bill, I have my name on it. It's okay.
Okay.
All right.
I appreciate
Thanks,
that.
everybody. We're back
Thank
to
you.
the bill. I appreciate the comments both ways. Further comments, committee, before we bring up the bill. Now we've got, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this probably is aimed at our most senior senator. So looking at page number 2, lines 13 through, or excuse me, lines 6 through 7, the 10 days that are taken out, does that count against our 40 days? And one of the questions that I would have is, as I recall, we meet for 40 days in odd numbered years, 20 days in even number years. If the federal government doesn't get the census data to us until an even numbered year, does that mean that we only have 10 days for a budget session?
Not the most senior citizen.
Senator Scott. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think that this would be construed as being a standalone provision, would not affect the other provision for 60 days. But I would also recommend that if we're going to go forward with this, that we ask the LSO to research that question to see if we need to make an explicit exception to that provision so that that's the way it is. Because I think that's clearly the intent. And the question is, to implement that intent, do we need to say that this 10 days does not count against that 60 days?
Thanks, Senator Scott. Yeah, easily fixed if we're already into the Constitution. So further questions or comments? Okay, we're ready for a question. This bill will be a voice vote. It'll be the same because we'll just carry it to the next meeting the same.
No. We're gonna be here a while today.
So we've been asked to pull 22 LSO 56 till the next meeting, which is campaigns, donating organization formation requirements. So if there's someone in the room or otherwise to do it, that bill draft will not come till our next meeting. We will now take up 22 LSO 0055 campaign reports amendments. And that's LSO. Is that? Back again, popular today. Oh, we've got our favorite two here, so welcome. It's a 2-page bill. Make it easy.
Mr. Chairman, David Hopkinson with Bella. So this bill was brought at the request of the Secretary of State's office from the previous meeting. There's really not much to it, and so I'll defer to the Secretary of State's office on the why for the bill. As you see, all it really does is strike some language in 2225-106, the filing and campaign reports there on page 2, lines 11 and 12. It deletes which expends any funds in any primary, general, or special election. And that's all the bill does.
Questions, committee? No questions. Very good. we have anyone in the waiting room on this one? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought she'd just butt in if she.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee Jennifer Martinez with the Secretary of State's office. And so the intent of this bill is really to require all political action committees and candidate campaign committees to file a statement of contributions and expenditures regardless of whether or not they actually expend funds. So currently in the law, the way it reads is they're only required to file these reports if they expend funds in an election. And so this past election cycle, we actually have never had an issue with this. Currently, our system prompts users to file a report. If they don't file it, then we receive a notice in our office indicating that there was a failure to file. However, because of this specific statute, it's only if they're expending funds that they're actually really held accountable with that requirement. And so in this past election cycle, the Political Action Committee that did fail to file, we were actually in course trying to reach out to them for several months actually to determine whether or not they did expend funds because there is an administrative order process that our office uses if an entity does fail to file a report. And so this bill just actually kind of requires PACs and candidate committees to simply be required to file regardless of if they expend funds, as I've already mentioned. And it helps alleviate that kind of limbo lingering scenario where we may have these committees out there who we can't get a hold of and we don't know if we should pursue the administrative process or not. In that particular situation, we did actually finally get in touch with them and were able to pursue the appropriate action. So that is why we're bringing the bill today.
Thank you. Question from Ms. Martinez. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, technical question. This speaks to political action committee or candidates campaign committee. What happens if their expenditure is just to a candidate who does not have such a candidates campaign committee, which is, I think, getting to be increasingly common in legislative races? Is there, if they contribute just to those folks, are they not required to make a report? Because I can't find that elsewhere in the statute.
Martinez.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, just so I understand the question correctly, are you asking if a candidate who does not have a candidate campaign committee or?
Well, Mr. Chairman, this requires these outside entities, independent entities, to report when they make a contribution to a campaign, a political action committee or to a candidate's campaign committee. But it is silent on the issue of just a report to a candidate. Now, the candidate would have an obligation to, as with these other entities, to make a report that received it. But I don't see the parallel reporting requirement for the political action committee or campaign committee to make a report when they're just making a contribution to a candidate.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I think I would understand that the same, that they aren't required to currently file a statement of contributions and expenditures only if they are receiving.
Senator Scott, I guess the way I see it, he's talking about an individual. So you, as a senator out of Indrisville, as just himself and not a campaign committee, does that exempt him out of the rules? This law still, or does he got somewhere else under statutes to file? Because what it's doing is creating a loophole if you don't have a committee that you don't have to file. Is that correct or not?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in 2225-106, Romanet 1, every candidate is required regardless to file a statement of contribution and expenditure. As far as if they have the candidates committee filing on behalf of that candidate, unfortunately, I'm not a lawyer and I can't speak to the legality of that, but I would assume that they would probably fall under the candidate reporting requirements as well.
Sarah Case.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's pretty much right, but I think if you have a committee, you actually have to file every year by the law, I think. That used to be the old law, but if you don't have a committee, you only have to file in an election year. So I think maybe the questions are going kind of like this.
Mr. Chairman.
Sarah Scott.
Chairman, I think my question is being misunderstood. Really, the question is, should we add to this contributes, you look at line 9, contributes to a, should the next words be a Wyoming candidate, Wyoming Political Action Committee? Because it's responsibility here. The candidate has to, with the section that was cited, the candidate has to report under existing law, but the committee making the contribution does not unless it's to a committee.
Further clarification, committee? I myself have a little bit of a hard time figuring out the committees and the individuals. I think be aligned closer anyway. I'm not further down the road. They shouldn't mirror each other because right now I'm the same way. Is under one, you've got to file all the time. Under the other one, you don't. Fortunately, your office sends us notices and tells us. Other than that, I wouldn't know when to file. Yeah, and I think everyone should. If that's the case, I ought to get rid of mine as well. So, any further questions? Okay, through agencies or representative senators want to present? Apparently not. Who's in the waiting room? We let Steve Klein in, Mr. Klein, in the waiting room.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Mr. Klein, we're
The
ready.
audio
You're not
online
really
is
up.
lagging by maybe half a minute or a minute, so I don't know that I can sit for questions today. But Stephen Klein, on behalf of the Wyoming Liberty Group, just want to state that I understand the second bill of the day, campaign finance, has been withdrawn. I'm glad to hear that. This bill really brings into focus a problem relating to what the definition of a political action committee is under Wyoming statutes 22-1-102. That's really all that's going to happen. This has been a lingering problem in Wyoming campaign finance law, probably for decades. The biggest problem here is that under, again, 22-1-102, it's in a weird place because chapter 25 of the campaign finance laws, but this definition is all the way up with all the other general election laws. Again, it's a little difficult because I'm lagging so much, and I appreciate the indulgence of the committee. And if any of this is out there, great. If not, certainly I can be reached by email, and hope that the streaming is a little better next time. It's been great to see many of you.
Thank you. Any delayed questions for Mr. Klein? Okay, thank you. Sorry about the delay. Who else is in the waiting room? Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chestick, I will let him in right now.
Okay, I'm in the room. Can you give me a visual signal that you can hear me? Okay, good. I had the same problem Mr. Klein has. There's at least a 10-second or more delay between the video and the audio, so it's a little tricky. I have some comments. Actually, I had comments on both of these drafts, because I think they work together and my comments
gotcha.
go together on both of these drafts. So if you don't mind, I'm going to make comments that are relevant to this bill, but also to the one that you put off until next time. Because I think the problem is that both of these bills, while marginally improving things, they miss the main point. And I would like to see, like to encourage the committee to come back in the next meeting with bills that actually meet the problem. These don't do it. Neither of these bills meet the actual problem. My name is Ken Chestick, by the way. I am the president of Wyoming Promise, Inc. I've seen you all before. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. You know that we are a group that is interested in transparency in elections and elimination of dark money from our political systems. We've been before you in past sessions to try and get a resolution adopted. We'll be back again in the general session in 2023. But in the meantime, we're trying to do whatever we can to minimize whatever we can do to minimize the problem of dark money. Citizens United put a huge roadblock in the ability of local governments to control and regulate dark money, but it did leave something open. And what Citizens United left open was the reporting requirements. It says you can't ban dark money, you can't ban corporate contributions that are for independent expenditures, but you can require disclosure. You can't, and so transparency, that is the one thing that Citizens United left us. So Wyoming does have a statute, the ones that we're talking about here, section 101 through 108 or 109. Those are the sections that do require, create the requirement, the reporting requirement for PACs that are spending money and other organizations that are doing independent expenditures. They are required to make financial disclosures. The problem is that the enforcement mechanism of these is so weak as to be meaningless. And that's the problem that needs to be addressed and which both of these bills miss. Section 106 is the one that's being amended in this. The amendments that are being proposed in LSO draft 55 maybe will increase the number of reporters perhaps, but it really only increases the number of reporters who will try to evade the reporting requirement. The way to evade the reporting requirement is simply don't make a report. And the penalty for not filing any report is $500. You pay $500, you get out of jail free. You don't have to make a report, you just pay $500 and you no longer have to do the report. That's how that's in section 108. Let me just read section 108. Well, you can read section 108. It's 25 or 22 dash 22 108 is the 22 25 108 says that you must file your report. If you don't, the failure to file results in a penalty of $500 for a state race, $200 for a county race. That's a cost of doing business for these groups. That if they can hide their donors by paying $500, they're going to do it. They have done it. And I don't know how much we all know that there was a big problem in the last cycle with dark money in a bunch of campaigns that some of the incumbents, including a member of this committee, were defeated in the primary based on some dark money spending by this group. I don't know how many races they target, but let's hypothetically say that the group targeted 10 legislators and they spent $5,000 each on those 10 races, total of $50,000 spent in these dark money campaigns. And they don't file their reports. Instead, they pay $500. That's 1% of what they've spent. That's not going to be a deterrent for anybody. So what we need to do is beef up section 108, which neither of these bills does, and beef up section 108 to make it a real penalty and make sure that it has teeth. The other problem with the section is that the timing of the report is too late to do any good. These reports are due 7 days before the election. So the dark money group could be spending money right and left for months before the election. And then at the last second, if they choose to make a report, they report it 7 days before the election, which doesn't give the targeted candidate who's been attacked enough time to mount a sufficient defense against the attack. So the timing is all wrong. It's very, very bad for the candidate who's been attacked. So I would like to see a bill brought to the committee that fixes both of those problems. There's many different ways to fix the problem, and I'll leave it up to the creativity of the committee and the LSO. But of course, most of the ways I think of solving the problem would require some additional enforcement mechanisms for the Secretary of State. And I know Secretary Buchanan is there. He's not going to hate hearing that, but the Secretary of State's office would have more work to do.
Do you either want to?
So let me just finish. I'm almost done here. So my suggestion would be to enlist the help of the candidates in enforcing this.
You'll hear it late. We need you either be in favor or opposed to the bill or work with a legislator to bring another one.
I'm opposed to these bills because they don't do what has to be done. And I would like to see a bill brought that actually, because the bills could actually fix, if you change these bills to address the real problem, they could be, these bills could be amended to fix those problems. But the suggestion that I would like to see happen is to require candidates, these PACs and these groups that are spending money in independent expenditures to attack other candidates, as soon as they make their public attack, they have to notify a candidate that's been attacked and by filing the report that who has funded it. And then if the candidate doesn't get that report, then the campaign that made the attack has to pay money to the candidate they've attacked. That's a suggestion, not the only way to fix it, but that's my suggestion. So I would like to see both of these bills reworked to address the real problem of the penalty is simply insufficient to do any good. Thank you. I'll be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions? None. Thank you. Anyone else in the audience to address this bill? Please come forward. Welcome. Speak in the center. There you go.
Mr. Chairman and representatives, this is my first time making any comments here. I appreciate the opportunity. My question is, would
Need
this?
your name, pretty
I'm
please.
sorry, Barbara Chase. I'm from here in Sheridan. And my question is, would this bill require disclosure of funds that are spent by different groups that are supporting or opposing policies as well as candidates?
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I think it would apply to candidates or ballot measures. It would not necessarily apply to lobbying the school board or advocating for some generic thing that's not a law change or a candidate.
Okay.
Rebuttal.
Well, Aliso can correct me, but any political action committee I don't know how you know is my problem, but I think it is a little more broad. Certainly the candidate's campaign committee would be for that candidate, but any political action committee from another state, which I don't always understand how you can force another PAC from another state operating here to do anything, but I think it would apply anything that PAC was set up to do in our state. So that could be a referendum, a local election, the way I read it, but Aliso would probably correct me if I'm wrong.
No comment from LSO. We'll just leave it. Senator Case.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I know that that makes sense, but it says this is all tied to an election. So it's either a ballot measure or a candidate. So it's, and what you say makes perfect sense, but this is tied to an election where you approve a policy or you like a constitutional initiative or constitutional change or a candidate. It definitely could be a school board. I'm sorry, it's any election.
Thank you for your testimony.
Okay.
Sorry, we don't have better answers for you. Could you shut the mic off before you leave, please?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public testimony? Mr. Cranty, I thought you were done for the last time.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I really wanted to be. I actually have more of a question, and I understand if it can't be answered immediately, but this says specifically, political action committee that is organized outside of the state of Wyoming, but does electioneering, transmission, whatever, that'll affect an election or a ballot measure in Wyoming. Well, if they're organized outside of the state of Wyoming, and I want to give you a scenario, and they utilize a Denver-based TV station, and they never come into Wyoming. The internet doesn't exist in Wyoming, even though we have it in Wyoming. How legitimately do we enforce this on a non-Wyoming entity that isn't physically operating within Wyoming, but those things are being beamed into Wyoming?
And it's called a feel-good measure. Self-compliance, but there is no way. It's the same as we deal with the Fed. So we just don't have a mechanism to deal with it. Okay, any further testimony? See, now come on forward.
Thank you for a bit of time with you. My name is Sue Hierman. I'm neither very political or very knowledgeable. I'm here not representing Wyoming Promise, but I am here because of them. I collected signatures. We were trying to get it thing on the ballot where the people of Wyoming could vote to get dark money out of politics. And when you're considering bills in the future here on these things, I hope you will apply that issue to solving the problem. I also would ask you please to think about the incredibly large number of signatures required to get a grassroots issue on our ballot in Wyoming. It was something I was not aware of, but it's an incredibly large number. And if we really want to hear from the people, I think it should be easier to get an issue on the ballot. And I don't know enough about the history or why, but you all probably know more than I do. I wanted to share some of my experiences, and this has been several years ago, collecting those petitions, but people were extremely angry. I was shocked at how angry people were about the election process and not being listened to by elected officials. And I also heard how much they were dropping out of the scene because they didn't feel like they had any voice. The kind of thing, I sent my $20 into your election campaign, but somebody else sent 200 or 2,000 or whatever, and they don't feel like they get listened to. And I just wanted to share that with you as a grassroots.
Great job, first time. Anyone else in the audience? Comments? Bill?
Would there be any amendments to the bill?
Bill
So
has not
I would
been
move the
moved.
bill.
Okay.
I'd second it.
Any amendments? Any amendments? This bill can go ahead and go on, correct? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would offer an amendment on page 2, and that would be to include the penalty provision, which is 2225-108. Paragraphs, I believe it would encompass paragraphs A, B, and F, Romanet I. And the gist of it would be that currently the fine is $500 for failure to file. The amendment would be that it would change it to $500 per day, starting with the day that the report was due. So if the report was due on the 1st of the month, that every day that the report was delinquent, it would be $500. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We have a second for the amendment? Second. Discussion. Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really like that in theory, and especially when we talk about political action committees, but the section also is about candidate campaign committees. And I think if we add, well, and I don't know how to fix the way the amendment was worded. I just think that is steep for, citizen campaigns and campaign committees, and yes, they need to be evolved, but those of us in this committee know that a lot of candidate committees are not always great on filing reports on time, and there should be a penalty, but I don't know if that much per day is significant. I guess we would have told them twice and put their names in the papers, so maybe, yeah, sorry, I just want to say I'll support it, but I bet we're going to need a little bit of change come session to delineate, to just ensure we're not catching the mom and pops in a bad situation.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, along those lines, I remember the discussion when we put this penalty in, where there'd been no penalty before. And the discussion was we didn't want to make it too high because you will catch a number of citizens who have filed, because you're talking about any person here, who have filed for office, and we have a fair problem with those people missing and not getting their reports done or done on time. You start putting this kind of penalty on, you're going to discourage people from running because it's the sort of thing that people can inadvertently do, not understanding the details of the campaign finance law. And this one here was the thought at the time, this should be enough to get their attention to get it done, but it isn't impossibly onerous, such it will discourage people after there's been an example or two from running at all. And that's why the numbers are the way they are. Mr. Chairman, I recommend we leave them alone.
I'll join in. I feel the same way. I'll give you an example, and it's kind of enter the minds there. So the candidate campaign committees require a second person to do the filing for you. So if your second person doesn't respond to the Secretary of State's email, which mine has not before, your office is phenomenal at getting a hold of you and saying, look, they're not answering back. But if your second person doesn't do it, you might have a $15,000 fine by the time you get your person pulled off your committee. And I think really what this leads to, there'll be no more candidate committees. Probably they'll all be individuals, because as an individual, you click the button and you're done. But as a candidate committee, you have to have a second person to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and vote yes, assuming we can fix it and amend it. I'll vote against the bill if I need to, but I do think it requires quite a bit more work. Is there another comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thought that I have, and I am not as familiar with this process, but I like the idea. I'm going to vote for the amendment. So I'm on and for the amendment, but I may bring us another amendment that provides discretion to the Secretary of State that, upon good cause, the fine might be waived, something to that effect. I'll come up with some brilliant language, but that way, there is an ability for particularly individual candidates to have some of that additional grace period. But, you know, any kind of feedback from the Secretary of State's office on that potential amendment would be prudent, I think. And I don't know if that's too much discretion or if they get in some type of odd situation of, you know, who gets the grace period and who doesn't, or who gets it waived and who doesn't. But I think that's probably a saving mechanism while still having a bit of a hammer.
Mr. Secretary of State, for the 18th time today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Secretary of State Buchanan, Mr. Chairman. On your amendment or your comments, Senator Nethercott, and for Representative McGuire, there is a 21-day grace period in here we kind of deal with, because under subsection F, it says a person failing to comply with 22-25-106 it's 21 days from the date the notice was sent under subsection B. And so we, on the one hand, I have issues as we speak with, you're right, it's just the cost of doing business, $500, it's nothing. But we also have, we've had legislators in the past, we've had other folks that are really pretty innocent in the, sometimes they can't figure out the system because it's all online now and it was paper back in the day. And so you have that grace period in there. So you might just think about extending that. And so that when you get to the end of a 30-day period or something like that, then you kick in the heavy fines or something along those lines. Because by that point in time, you could say there's no longer any excuse for you to have not filed a report. Some entities will not file their report because they don't believe they have to for other reasons. And then others are just technically not very savvy, or they forgot, things like that. So the grace period kind of gives you some leeway to maybe determine an appropriate daily fine as you talk.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, to the point to the Secretary, how would you feel about having some authority to waive the fee for good cause shown?
You know, that's where I brought up, Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, I brought up the grace period because I really am not terribly comfortable with exercising because what good cause is to one group is not good cause to another, and then it becomes political. And I certainly would want to treat everybody fairly, objectively, and consistently. I think the grace period kind of takes out all of the possible good cause excuses, right? I mean, if you had 21 days or if you had 30 days, how long did you have a computer glitch? How long did you forget after we sent you notice? How long for what good cause would there be that someone wouldn't find out and couldn't be able to comply within 30 days? And as it is now, 21 days.
So no, you do not want the discretion.
But it was no very nicely
It was.
said.
And come on,
I just don't
who's
wanna
got
say
time for that?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, if I may, just note that if an order is imposed, the individual or entity does have currently 20 days within the order where they can request reconsideration following the 21-day grace period.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As this currently stands, as we currently have this before us, would these penalties apply to that end of the year finance report that's required of the statewide electeds, even in the year that they're not running? And I guess, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's the disclosure report that all people are, and that's a different report. There probably is a different penalty somewhere. That's not a campaign finance disclosure.
Further questions, committee? We have a question on the amendment. Mr. Co-Chairman, do you have a comment?
Thanks. I'm going to vote for the amendment, but I do want it known that this was not what the Secretary of State asked for. This was a kind of a simple cleanup amendment to fix a specific problem. And obviously the statute's open, so we can do what we will, but it is taking this, what was supposed to be, I think, a fix to a greater level than was anticipated, I'm sure, from the Secretary of State. So I'm going to vote in favor of it, but I wanted to make it known that we're going a little broad here and off topic, but it works.
Okay, we're on the super fix. I mean, the amendment. Yeah. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Amendments passed. We're back on the bill. Question on the bill. This bill is just going to go, so this will be a roll call, please.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 22 LSO 55 for committee sponsorship for campaign reports amendments as amended. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Case. Senator Nethercott. Senator Scott.
No.
Representative Blackburn. Representative Clausen. Representative Clifford. Representative Duncan. Representative Air. Representative Hunt. Representative McGuire. Representative Roscoe. Co-Chairman Zwanzer. Chairman Driscoll. 1 no.
How many breaks are we gonna take? An event that requires busing that's leaving at 5:30. So not to rush you, Commissioner Rude, but if you can do it in 20 minutes.
Your next pizza will be free if we don't.
Well, and I will let you drive home tonight instead of staying over the night, although Sheridan is lovely. I have a quorum as soon as Representative Clausen sits. So at this point, committee, are we back on, Katie? Please welcome Commissioner Rude in the Department of Insurance. Is this your bill you're presenting, or are you going to turn it over to Ms. Johnson today?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I'll introduce folks, but I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Stevenson, which is new to our office. So committee, my name is Jeff Root.
If you hold the mic just a little closer.
Committee, hello, my name is Jeff Root. I'm the Insurance Commissioner, and with me is the Deputy Commissioner, Ms. Johnson, and our Licensing Supervisor, Brian Stevenson. We're bringing a proposed bill to update our licensing and CE statutes, and I will turn it over to him to do that.
Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have the draft in front of us. Starting at the bottom of page 1, we're going through definitions in 26.1.102. This was brought up to us shortly after the last time we talked about this bill. Our AG representative noticed that we had a conflict in our definition, so we are just updating this one and changing on line 9 the word "and" to "or." That brings us in line with statute 26.9.219's definition, which we have been advising folks on for several years and making sure that people are licensed correctly.
And Mr. Simpson, we did see this bill in June as well at our committee meeting. So yeah, if you could just hit the high level changes, and I don't need to go page by page.
Got it. Say high level, when we're talking about section 2, we are changing, we are updating our fees so that all non-resident licensees pay $150 for an initial application and $150 for a renewal. 26.9.201, we are updating so that everybody licensed under this chapter gets exemptions for military and disability. They all have the same reporting requirements, and they all have address update requirements. 26.9.202, we're adding some definitions for continuing education provider, public adjuster, and licensee. The licensee change is applied in 26.9.207 and 26.9.216. 26.9.231, we are updating our continuing education statutes to move the burden of continuing education fees off of the producers and onto the providers. Section 3, we are striking that licenses must be displayed at a place of business, as the only accurate way to determine if someone is licensed is to check the online databases or to contact the department. We are also removing the requirement to return a license upon expiration, as we no longer send out paper copies of licenses. 26.9.231 takes that fee off of the producers for continuing education that we moved over to the providers. And section 5 just deals with the effective dates. Some of these we want to make effective January 1, 23, as our providers have asked for some time to make sure they get their business rules updated, get their online applications updated. The ones that we're removing, we would prefer that they just be enacted immediately because no changes are needed other than the statute.
And the list of repealers, LSO was nice enough to post in there. I appreciate that. I'm not sure which one of you did that, but it's really nice, Mr. Hopkinson, to have a list of the repealers in front of us. Any questions from the committee? I know this is the second time you saw the bill draft, and there's going to be some conversations, I believe, on that and verse or coming forward. So we'll cover that at the appropriate time. No public or no committee questions this time. That was easy, Mr. Stevens. Congratulations.
I do what I can.
We check the waiting room, see if anyone wishes to testify. We have Ms. Wilkinson. Let me bring her in. Or Les, would you like to go first, Ms. Shaner? You drove all the way and left Ms. Wilkinson in Cheyenne. So I bet I would get at least one of those nice insurance people to give you a seat up there at the table, and maybe Mr. Stevens, if you'd stay up there just in case we have questions. Welcome, Ms. Shaner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Mary Ann Shaner, and I am here today representing State Farm Insurance. And as the chairman alluded to, we do have some concern related to the change on page 2, changing the and to the or in the adjuster definition. And we're really a little uncertain as to what impact that this change could potentially have on adjuster licensing in the requirements under the state of Wyoming. However, as you know, an and to an or can be a very significant change under the law. And it generally broadens a statement by requiring that not only both conditions be met, but one condition could be met instead. And a critical element in our view of adjusting activities is applying the facts of the loss to the policy in order to negotiate the settlement of the claims. However, the change to or potentially makes it so adjuster licensing is required for any type of claim investigation. So many activities performed by insurance company employees involve gathering facts or investigating a claim, including determining the estimated cost to repair a vehicle or a building. In other words, appraising damage caused by a loss. However, a licensed adjuster then is always involved in coming in to apply the facts to the policy and in order to negotiate the settlement of the claim. And so this proposal to change the and to an or potentially swoops into adjuster licensing, appraising, and other investigating activities. No other state requires that appraisers be licensed as adjusters, and only a handful of states require that adjusters be licensed. And in those states that do require adjusters to be licensed, there are very specific statutes that are applicable to, or excuse me, I said appraisers. In the states that require appraiser licensing, there are very specific statutes for the appraiser licensing. And the exam is specifically focused on appraiser activities and not adjusting activities. And the ability of insurance companies to use non-adjusters, employees to investigate the facts of a claim increases claim handling efficiency and the ability of insurance companies to settle claims more quickly for consumers. So we are concerned that by implementing this change from and to or, that it is swooping in the appraisers under the adjuster licensing statutes and would require appraisers to and other insurance investigation folks to get an adjuster license. And again, this would be unique to Wyoming, the only state in the country that would require it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions, but we are opposed to this change. We think that if the committee feels that there's an inconsistency, that the better change would be to fix in the section quoted in the staff comment 26.9-219 and change the purpose of investigating or making adjustment of a particular loss under insurance policy to investigating and making adjustments. The way that the statutes read, as you know, with a definition that's at the beginning of an act applies throughout the code. And so when you have in this section that comes on later, a Wyoming adjuster's license is required of any adjuster, then that's where the definition comes into play. So we do think it could be a very substantial change.
But the rest of the bill, you're generally okay with?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, would that be generally favorable, friendly?
In a perfect world, Ms. Shaner, I mean, we could make the adjustment either way today, move the bill forward, and then, that gives everybody 5 months to come up with an amiable solution, if possible, when the bill's there. And maybe Mr. Stevens, if you have comments on either the AG's office included and why it was changed and what the significance is from your end, that would be appreciated.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it has been the department's stance for several years that the definition in 269219, where it is investigating or making an adjustment, is the statute that we should be following. It was brought to our attention by the AG's office just a couple months ago that we had this conflict in 261102 and recommended to us by them and by our staff counsel at the agency or at the department that we changed that and to an or in 261102.
Okay. But technically, you wouldn't consider Hill to die on the behalf of the entire bill? I mean,
On
that's
behalf of
obviously-
the entire bill, no, but that has been our stance for several years now and has been communicated to companies as such.
And that's how you've interpreted the statutes currently?
Yes.
Okay. Further questions? Seeing none at this time. Senator Scott, how are you down there? Go ahead.
Should we, in your judgment, go into 269219 and change that or to an and?
Mr. Chairman, Senator
Shaner.
Scott, yes, we do think that that would be a fix, and it is our interpretation, and that that this would cause significant confusion on the licensing of appraisers and adjusters with the change as indicated by the department.
Further questions, Ms. Shaner? Not seeing it right now. Thank you very much,
Thank
especially
you.
for driving all the way up here this morning, I understand. With that, I know we have someone in the waiting room named Ms. Wilkinson who'd like to testify. Go ahead. Go ahead, Catherine. Floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Catherine Wilkinson, here today representing American and Property and Casualty Insurance Association. Mr. Chairman, in lieu that you are trying to leave here in 7 minutes, I will be very brief. Ms. Shaner did outline the major concerns that APCIA does have with the bill. And in fact, we did not comment at your last meeting because we had no concerns. It was completely neutral, and that one little word has taken us from neutral to opposition of the entire bill. I have not run the suggested language proposed by Ms. Shaner by my clients because everything was taken up with the confusion of that one change, proposed change in the statute. So we will be standing in opposition to the bill with that. I just think the main thing is the intent of it completely changes the entire meaning and causes a lot of confusion among companies over whether or not appraisers are being licensed now in this bill and would have to qualify as an adjuster. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Questions from Ms. Wilkinson? Seeing none at this time. Thank you, Catherine, for tuning in. Other public comment related to this bill? Seeing no current public comment and no one else on this bill in the waiting room. Well, let me make sure. Ms. Lee, did you want to comment on this bill? Go ahead. I think you're waiting to talk to the committee on a different issue though, but let me double check.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. We don't have comments on this bill.
Okay, I'll get you in just a second. All right, we'll close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure on the bill itself? Moved as a committee bill for the 2022 session, seconded by Blackburn, moved by Case. Any amendments or discussion, committee, on the current bill draft? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, page 2, line 9, move we delete the new or and insert and. And Mr. Chairman, I think the effect of the amendment, if passed, would be to remove this section from the bill, the way the LSO drafts things.
LSO agrees with that. Yep. Is there a second to that amendment? Seconded by Duncan. Discussion, committee. I would, I guess, personally say as a current chairman, it's difficult when a private corporation comes and has a different interpretation than our own, attorney general staff on what language reads and how it affects. And so hopefully there'll be more conversation regardless of which way the committee votes on ensuring that, it's a fair marketplace and things mean what they mean. So vote your conscience on that. But it is an interesting thing on one word that has two different attorneys, one that works for the state and one for private corporations, saying means different things. Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I guess that's kind of my point too. We ought to be able to get to the bottom of this so that everybody's happy, I think. It's not exactly a model act. It sort of follows policies in other states. So I'm sure there's guidance on that we could look to. So I think this will probably come back and need to be tweaked, but I hope everybody gets together.
So all in favor of the amendment to move the or back to an and, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. That motion is passed. Back on the bill. Further, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, on page 3, line 17, I move we bring into the bill 269219, and what's on line 17, remove the or and replace it with an and.
Is there a second? For discussion purposes. Seconded by Duncan and Senator Scott, if you'd go through and further explain that.
Mr. Chairman, you want me, basically, I'm trying to make it consistent with the other section. And the reason I'm doing that, Mr. Chairman, is I think that makes the regulatory burden on the companies less onerous, gives them more flexibility to use unlicensed people, where I think you can perfectly well get by with them doing half of this work.
Okay, further discussion on the amendment. Seeing none, all in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. That amendment is passed. Back on the bill. Further discussion committee. Seeing none and question being called. Mr. Stevens, welcome back. Further discussion.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I just wanted to bring up, if you are going to change the or on line 17, it is also listed on line 10 on page 3. If we're trying to make it consistent, I just want to make sure that we cover all our bases.
Ella, so you got that? We'll consider that part of the amendment to make the change consistent throughout the draft. Great. Further discussion. Okay, on the motion to make this a committee-sponsored bill for the 2022 budget session. Katie, if you'd call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 22 LSO 59 for committee sponsorship on insurance amendments as amended. Senator Boner. Senator Case. Senator Nethercott. Senator Scott. Representative Blackburn. Representative Clausen. Representative Clifford. Representative Duncan. Representative Ayer. Representative Hunt. Representative McGuire. Representative Roscoe. Co-Chairman Driscoll. Chairman Zwanser. 13 ayes, 1 excused.
All right. Anything else on behalf of the Department of Insurance today, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman, that is not. Thank you for squeezing this.
Don't let him run away too fast. I've got a question, and I
Yep.
think Ms. Lee has a question, so.
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Well, my question is in regards to the forfeiture, what am I looking for here? The forfeiture rate that I understand there's model legislation on, I can't remember. I'm drawing a blank, but hold on. I've got a note for it. Maybe Ms. Lee could go first, because I did talk to her about this.
Sure. Ms. Lee, I assume you can hear me. Welcome to corporations. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Kristen Lee, and I'm an attorney with Brownstein, Hyatt, Barber and Schreck in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and I'm representing the American Council on Life Insurers. With me today is Mr. Brian Byerly, and he's in the waiting room. And Brian is a senior actuary with the American Council on Life Insurers. Can answer your technical questions, but this will be very brief. We're proposing changes to Wyoming statute 2616-404. And that statute is the minimum non-forfeiture statute, which sets a minimum floor when a person defaults or stops paying their annuity contracts with the life insurance company. When a person stops making their payments on their annuity, the company is required to refund certain monies under the law. And the minimum interest rate, the floor on those monies is currently 1%, in our law. We're asking the committee today to direct your staff to draft a small but important change to this law. We're proposing to lower the minimum interest rate to lower it to 0.15% or 15 basis points. We're asking for this change because of the current interest rate environment. In 2020, the yields for the US 5-year and 10-year treasuries have gone as low as 0.19% and 0.52%, 0.52% respectively. It's not possible to support the current 1% minimum guarantee in the statute today. I need to emphasize that this change would only apply to new contracts. It would not apply retroactively or to any existing contracts. As of today, 14 states have adopted these changes and 5 more states are awaiting final approval. And we stand for any questions. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case, go ahead.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if you think about this proposed change, you can't make companies, they would have to pay out if this was the minimum change was 1%, it sounds like it's terribly low, but it's less than they actually make. You can't, it's kind of a confiscation issue if you think about it. And so these policies have other language that specifies things, but it's tied to rates of T-bills and things like that. And it'll say, the forfeiture rate is tied to the 6-year T-bill, blah, 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 but in no instance shall be less than 1%. That's what the law says now. The truth is, interest rates are practically negative. And so this lowers that minimum, but it doesn't change it in the market. If the T-bill rates are higher, they get paid higher. It only keeps the companies from losing money. And if they lose money, and they give it to some customers, it costs other customers money. So I throw that out.
Ms. Lee, would you
Have a
agree?
bill draft. It's model legislation.
And committee, the request is from Ms. Lee just to have this drafted and from LSO to present at our November meeting to have a further discussion on is really the request today. And I know Mr. Barely is waiting, but I'm not sure if we need to hear from him unless there's questions on the motion. So, I mean, does anybody disagree?
Well, we should let him talk though, because he's paying money to Ms. Lee and they always feel better if they get a talk.
Well,
Mr. Byerly has given up several appointments and he's on the East Coast and he is he's a registered lobbyist now as of yesterday in Wyoming. And I think a Wyoming welcome would be maybe to say good evening to Mr. Byerly.
All right. Well, Mr. Byerly, you already hired the best lobbyist, but we would invite next to Ms. Shaner.
And Ms. Wilkerson. Yes.
If you would like to address the committee on the need and in a short fashion, please proceed.
Sure, and good evening to everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Again, as Ms. Lee pointed out, obviously we do think this is a business need. Critically, it does not impact any in-force contracts. This is a prospective change only to the law. So we do think it is appropriate given the economic conditions that we find ourselves in. And as Ms. Lee pointed out, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. But appreciate the welcome. Thank you.
Questions, Mr. Byerly? Not seeing any, but do appreciate you tuning in. Committee, any questions? I mean, we can talk more about it, but I mean, we could chairman's prerogative it to the next meeting as well. It does fall in line with our interim topics. I do think it's timely. Senator Case.
Can we get a draft?
That's all they're asking for is for LSO to take Ms. Lee's language and put it into LSO draft form for a November meeting. I don't think we even need a vote unless there's strong sentiment from the committee against. Okay. All generally in favor, say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? It sounds like you have a mostly unanimous minus maybe a couple misleads. So we will direct LSO to draft that legislation. And I have a copy. If you don't, we'll send to LSO and maybe Mr. Byerly can come out to Wyoming for our November meeting. We need all the tourism we can get.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, committee.
Thank you both. Any other insurance related topics today for anyone in the audience? Any other general public comment before tomorrow's meeting? So with that, I understand there's an economic development tour committee that Senator Kinsey and Ms. Simmons are putting on. And if there's nothing else to come before the committee today, we will adjourn for the day and start at 8 o'clock in the morning. Thank you all for surviving through the day today.